And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Halliday, and welcome to the Clean Capitalist Leadership Council 4th Annual Meeting, CCLC2020, Open for Innovation. Y bienvenidos a la gente de Latinoamérica. We have an ambitious program today that will touch upon energy policy, innovation policy, tax incentives, trade barriers, and opening markets to new innovative technology and competition. I'd like to thank all the attendees and panelists for sharing their valuable time and sharing their expertise with us. Rod Richardson is the co-founder of the Clean Capitalist Leadership Council and will moderate many of the sessions along with our expert session leaders. We're very pleased to be an official event of Climate Week 2020 and National Clean Energy Week, and this event is streaming on EarthX TV. EarthX and its founder, Trammell S. Crow, have been with us since 2016, and we really appreciate their support. And Trammell is going to say a few words about EarthX. Trammell, take it away.
Good to see you guys. I'm sure and glad to be included for the 4th year. In my prepared remarks, I was going to remind people that Adam Smith also talked about common values and morality when he talked about free trade. I always like to make that plug and never do hear that. People talk about one book that he wrote. And then I was going to give a commercial plug for EarthX TV, so I'll be brief. Thank you for letting me interrupt the thought process. Just like when we started 10 years ago on this little expo in Dallas for Earth Day, where we thought we'd have exhibitors and the public and so forth, which has turned into 200,000 people, 700 exhibitors, 15 conferences, all these things that we just had to cancel. We've gone to EarthX TV. We hope to be back with a conference and with the real actual event in 21 or 22. But we haven't found any significant media source of environmental news or information in depth or anything that's a significant media source with lots of it. Certainly nothing that addresses all issues. So that's what we've started to do as of this week. We've got our niche of Republican and Democrat and all perspectives, also dealing with all the various environmental issues, not getting hung up on climate. We had 50 hours of programming this week, and I hope you all will tune into EarthX TV at earthx.org, and look forward to meeting y'all.
So how about we go to Rod Richardson? He and Giberson are going to start the first session. Rod, say a few words, please.
Sure. Listen, I want to thank all of you very, very much for coming and zooming into our Charrette and the Clean Capitalist Leadership Council 4th annual meeting. It's great to be coming back to Charrette format. We actually started off this journey in 2016 through the Grace Richardson Fund with a Charrette at Columbia with the Rocky Mountain Institute. So it's interesting to be getting back to that now. I want to thank very much my co-chair, Trammell, and also to my co-hosts, the Reason Foundation with Julian Morris, ClearPath with Jeremy Harrell. We will have Charles Hernick from Crest coming in later, Marcin Brentnowski from the British Conservation Alliance. We have Roberto Salinas Leon from the Atlas Center for Latin America. Very pleased to have actually 4 different Atlas free market think tanks involved in this, including Guillermo Peña Panting from Honduras. This journey began in 2016 when Grace Richardson Fund first announced our new program to an audience of private foundations and think tanks. And we invited people to come innovate a new fertile area of policy with us. We pointed out, look, from 2011 to 2015, the poster children of clean technologies had, gone from being out of the money and more expensive than fossil fuels to being cheaper than fossil fuels. Both wind and solar crossed that border from 2011 to 2015. And when that change happens, it implied three things. First of all, that all the policies that had come before then were now subtly off base and out of date. They were based on the wrong assumption that somehow you absolutely needed a price adjustment mechanism of some kind in order to make these work at all and get into the money. You needed a price support, you needed to hammer down fossil fuels with carbon taxes or carbon prices, and that was essential. But it turns out that if you have competitive technologies, what really is essential is to let them compete. And that is one of the most important things you can do. The second, implication is that there's a whole new policy lever that we can pull now. And that policy lever is that when you have new unsubsidized profits, suddenly the tax rates on those profits matter a great deal. And that marginal tax rate cuts can help to accelerate capital flows to clean solutions. That there's, in fact, a way to take into account negative externalities that doesn't necessarily involve imposing burdens on the economy or demonizing any one industry, that you can use positive feedback rewards rather than negative feedback loops. We don't necessarily beat students anymore in universities. We actually, find it's more useful to reward them. But in any event, so with this in mind, we started pioneering clean tax cuts, but as we developed those ideas, which we will get to later on, a little bit later on in the program, what we found was that really that first insight about how important it is to let clean technologies compete is super important. So today, what we want to do is look at ways that we can open markets faster. Because to date, most of the efforts to open competitive markets have been somewhat of a piecemeal nature. But maybe what we can do is think about this from a 30,000-foot perspective and look at competitive markets in the United States and uncompetitive markets and power markets and free trade overseas, and find out some commonalities about what it is that opens markets and come up with some good ideas for how to open those markets faster. And to lead off our discussion today on that, we have Lynn Kiesling, but Julian Morris brought Lynn to our table. So Julian, who is the running the environmental program for the Reason Foundation, could you introduce Lynn for us?
Very quickly. So Lynn is an economist with about 30 years experience working in a range of areas, but especially working on regulatory issues and with a deep expertise in electricity markets and their regulation. I don't think I need to explain any further, but Lynn, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Julian, and thank you, Rod, for including me in this. And I'm really pleased to see that you're convening such an important conversation. Part of, I think, in this first session, some of the ideas that we wanted to put on the table have to do with how we open power markets to innovation and competition. And I'd just like to set the stage a little bit by making some introductory comments about the US landscape. And then I'm going to lateral the ball over to Pat Wood after I introduce him so that he can give some more detail from his experience. One of the challenges, and Rod used the word piecemeal, and I think that that's a really important concept to bear in mind when we think about the opportunities for competition and competitive markets to align environmental and economic incentives in the power industry. And so opportunities, but also identifying the challenges and the pinch points. And in part, one of the things that I think is a recurring theme that we see in the US landscape is the kind of overarching institutional framework that we've inherited through the 90 years almost now of history with the Federal Power Act and the the regulatory jurisdiction split between the states with jurisdiction over distribution and retail, and federal with distribution over bulk power and wholesale. And I know some of our participants have particular interests in kind of breaking open the black box of the Federal Power Act. Some of the challenges have been that as technology changed in the power industry, one of the hats I wear is technology historian, and so I always kind of look through the lens of technology and innovation. The technological innovations of the 80s and 90s really unleashed the potential for competition in generation and the creation of wholesale power markets. That journey is incomplete, though, because we really did start with wholesale power markets and focused on wholesale power markets. And really, I would argue, only in one place in the entire country have we had a holistic restructuring that amounts to the kind of deregulation that can create the competitive incentives, the competitive forces, and the competitive discipline to allow for both the static efficiency and then the dynamic kind of innovative efficiency in power markets. And that's Texas. And so that's one of the reasons why I thought having Pat Wood in this conversation would be crucial. Pat brings a wealth of expertise to this question, having served as the chair of the Texas PUC during its restructuring, and then later going on to be the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And then after completing public service, he has been involved in a lot of investment opportunities in the clean tech area. So I'm just going to kind of stop there and say, the legal institutions and the regulatory framework are really frame up what some of our challenges are. Texas is a good model for, I think, how we should think differently about aligning environmental and economic incentives through markets. So Pat, I'm going to lateral the ball to you and ask you to give us some introductory remarks.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. And thank you all for inviting me to be here. I think kind of the punchline here is why competition? And so when I go back to a day when I was interviewed by George W. Bush, and that would have been early 95, to be on the PUC, I said, I wanted to check with him before I wandered into a tar baby job, that I said, well, why do you want to do this? And he said, okay, better prices, better service, technological innovation. He said, that's kind of the easy stuff. But then he finally said, because it doesn't need regulating. He said, why are we regulating? The utilities care more about what the government thinks than what their customers think, and that's wrong. So it's kind of the customer-centric vision that really kind of initiated us. I think there are different kind of points of origin for all the places around the globe where you've seen much more direction toward competitive markets in power. But ours was customer based. And so our large industrial customers, which are probably a significant, well, maybe not significant, but bigger percentage of our total consumption in Texas than they would be in, say, Vermont. They were very much politically active and really had the political power to offset, the utilities who'd had a century of monopoly preference. So that was a significant issue in kind of the politics of it, having the governor strongly behind it, because he just philosophically believed in competition versus monopolies. It's kind of was an easy sell to a lot of Republicans, but so the trick was how to sell it to the Democrats. And so that really is where the customer focus on this thing. And interestingly enough, the environmental issues that flowed from our competition market opening deregulation were really a second tier deal. They were a part of the bill, to be sure. There was a requirement to close down dirty power plants or to pay to clean them up. But there was also a renewable portfolio standard that was said, hey, we want to put Texas on the map of getting from what we had, which was basically zero, some old hydro plants that weren't that efficient, going from that base to 200 or 2,000 more megawatts of power. So it was modest in this 70,000 megawatt market to do that kind of addition, but it was in there, and it was kind of viewed as to the world as a big welcome mat. That this competitive market's going to crack wide open. There'll be addressable customers of all sizes, from municipal utilities to military bases to big box retailers to residential customers and everybody in between. But we've got this welcome mat from this bipartisan legislature that looks like they want to have some renewable energy. So needless to say, from those of y'all that haven't followed the Texas market, we now are the number 5 nation in the world. The state of Texas is, as far as renewable electricity in our power system, and that was really driven completely by the market. The 2,000 megawatts was blown through. It was raised to 5. It was blown through. It was raised to 10,000 megawatts. It was blown through that. We've got 27,000 megawatts of mostly wind and now more and more solar coming into the state, displacing coal, displacing inefficient natural gas. There's still plenty of natural gas on the grid. Texas sits, as you know, right on top of a lot of it, as do a number of states. But in any event, those kind of things all came together. We had great resource. I think that was a blessing. Culturally, it wasn't tough for people to say making money out of energy is kind of the Texas way, whether it comes from under the ground or above it. We don't really care. So people are always so shocked that it's a red state, but it wasn't a red-blue issue. And I think, I really like the charge of this Charrette today, is that it really does look at how do we kind of get past the politics of this thing and get back to the original game, which is incentivizing, technology-loving, customer-friendly markets. They're kind of independent of this left-right political thing that came into place after I left government. So anyway, I look forward to delving into deeper with that, but that's just a little teaser about how Texas got on the map and why we continue to try to do it. It's customer driven, and it's all about economic development. How do you make a good location and a good place for people to live and have jobs? And so this has been a big part of that Texas story for the last 20 years.
Thank you very much, Pat, for joining us. It's an honor to have you in the mix. I just want to underscore one thing that Pat mentioned, because I think it's important for us as we think about how to move markets. You mentioned that one of the things that made the Texas market move in the competitive direction was the fact that it already had a lot of folks in the market who were independent energy producers who were primed to become independent power producers. My takeaway from that is that we will have more success moving markets to competition if we can increase the number of people who are in that category, who are independent power producers, ready to jump in further into that competition game. So with that, Lynn, go ahead and let's please continue.
Great, thanks, Rod. And thank you, Pat. One other piece of the puzzle in terms of preparing for this event was that my collaborator, Mike Giberson at Texas Tech University, and I have written a bit of a framing essay to help Julian and Rod and Jigger think about how the kind of policy proposals that they're thinking about intersect with the kind of tricky regulatory environment in the US. And so Mike is here, and at this point, Mike, I'm gonna just hand the floor over to you and ask you to say a couple of things quickly from your perspective in Texas, and also from the perspective as an energy researcher and some of the ideas that you and I have developed.
Thank you, and I appreciate being part of this conversation. Let me be kind of parochial in my start, because I'm here in Lubbock, Texas. Lubbock has the distinction, we have a we have an interesting electric power history in Lubbock that goes back, we had 90 years or so of dual wire competition in the city. We were served by a local municipal utility and a private utility, and basically two sets of wires down, and this is the sort of thing that economic theory says can't be done or is going to be wildly inefficient. But we had prices as low pretty much as anywhere else in the state, and better service. So in fact, about 10 years ago, the city utility bought out the private competitor. But now Lubbock, which is on the fringes of the Southwestern Public Service territory, is switching next year into ERCOT. So we're joining ERCOT, and the city utility plans to become the first municipal utility to opt into competition. So I'm looking forward to getting competition back into Lubbock, and in fact, better competition than we had before, because we had two choices, which was twice as many as most people, but soon we're going to have 30 or 40 choices or 150 choices. So this is all it's sort of exciting to be here, and both with Lubbock's history, but also with its sort of promising future. In the Texas power market, well, it's been a model. We were a model in 2002 when we started, but we haven't been static. The Texas market has been evolving. It's faced some challenges. There's been concerns, and I mean, I don't want to cross my fingers too much. I mean, we seem to be managing. The lights are staying on. Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of renewable being built, as Pat highlighted. Consumers, there's no longer, when we started, there was a 1 or 2 cent per kilowatt hour premium that consumers paid for high renewable content contracts, but now there's essentially no premium anymore, right? It's the same price. You can get 100% renewable for the same prices as almost anything else. It's just, I think it's a great story, not just for competition, but for the environmental benefits that have come along with it. I think the surprising thing for me has been how tough it's been to sell this success story in other states, because Nevada tried and had a good effort at trying to move to competition. They've talked about it in Arizona now. They've talked about it in Florida and other states, but it seems like such an obvious success in Texas that I'm surprised that we can't seem to sell it elsewhere.
And we're going to have to move to Guillermo for a fascinating story from Honduras. But just to underline that last point, Lynn or Pat or one of you, one of our central hypotheses in the clean free market policy is that, it really makes a difference to let clean technologies compete. And we think that it will translate into competitive markets decarbonizing faster and cheaper and more stably than uncompetitive markets. Do you think that proposition is true? Who wants to take that on?
Well, I mean, as one who's seen it firsthand, yes. I mean, if we'd have trusted the regulated utilities to lead the drive into decarbonized markets, I don't think we'd be anywhere. Now, I think it's starting to happen 25 years later in states other than Texas, because vertically integrated utilities, monopolies, are being able to envision that they could put those in rate base, which is, of course, the great end game of regulated utilities, is to be able to rate base and get large returns on equity, much larger than the market would give. So yes, I mean, my thought is, having seen it firsthand, technological innovation is not rewarded in the regulated market.
Right.
You're beaten down with monopsony power. You have one buyer. That one buyer beats you down to the core. There's not a healthy competitive market for the innovative technologies. I can be convinced otherwise, but I just haven't seen it. I mean, there's nothing intuitive that you can't get a monopoly and align their interests right, but nobody's willing to do that. The power, regulatory power corrupts over time, and I don't think that is very conducive to a technologically innovative environment.
So, Jigger, do you have anything to add on?
I mean, the folks who've talked before me are the world's experts, and so I'm not sure I have much to add except to say that my own point of view going up against utility is that they do a lot of irrational things on a regular basis, and so we always hope for rationality, but in the end are sorely disappointed, as Pat suggests.
I would like to pull into the conversation Guillermo Peña-Panting from Honduras. Guillermo has done a fantastic job of helping to move the power markets in Honduras in the direction of something that looks more like Texas. And just let me say that, the situation in the developing world in countries like Honduras is far more dire than in the United States, because these crony-dominated power markets are a dead stop to any development. You can't build anything if there's no power to plug it into. And these, crony-dominated power markets are so much power is being stolen and so much money is being stolen that they're delivering energy poverty, rolling blackouts, contributing a tremendous amount to the national debt. Women and children have to cook indoors over, garbage fires that are causing millions of deaths a year around the world. Women can't be liberated because they can't afford a washing machine. There's no power to plug it into. But Guillermo is addressing that. So Guillermo, can you tell us what are the key factors that led to the Honduran energy market opening up, that we can learn from? And tell us a little bit about what's going on in that market now and the threats you're facing.
Hi, Rod. Hi, everyone else. Thanks for having us. And it's a great pleasure to be on this 4th annual event. So Honduras has been moving, or this is the second reform that Honduras has tried since the early 90s to open up its markets. And the last one didn't really work. In this case, the legislation was changed to allow for an unbundling of the state utility to break up distribution transmission and move away from a single buyer system to a multiple buyer system. To put in context, our power generation is largely private, although the state utility still had some generation of its own. I've also brought in 2 good friends who've been a really big part of this effort, Jose Moran and Kevin Rodriguez, who Jose is the head regulator currently right now, and Kevin leads the Generators Association. Both have had a huge, I think, great results in the process, and allowing Eleutera to help out has been completely satisfying. So it wasn't until about a year ago, or a year and a half ago, that Jose came into the regulatory commission, and last, I think it was September, he asked me through our work at Eleutera, if we would help out to put on the consumer hat inside the system operator and help to set up what is now the system operator and a functioning spot market. So this effort started. We have a board at the system operator where all actors are representative: transmission, distribution, now consumers. Which the first consumer was registered into the market just this week. I hope Jose can say more about how that plan is going along. But we're moving into this unbundling system. The spot market is functional now, small but functional. And now we're getting into one of the hard parts, I think, is in the operation, getting past the regulatory process, is in sending the right signals into the market. And I'm going to let Jose speak more about that issue, because I think there's people here who can help us a lot, and I think that's one of the main purposes of this meeting. Yeah, Rod.
Guillermo, before you do that, I want to get to the, what was the precipitating factor, the thing that made Honduras move to deregulate? What was it that incentivized their move? Because I think that's important.
There was
important to bring up.
Massive dissatisfaction in the population with the energy service. We've been dealing for years with blackouts in certain periods of the year and expensive power as well. So investment, high energy consumption investment is limited by the possibilities of expensive power. And that, along with a very political process that had happened for contracts before this new energy system came in, made the whole sector look like a very bad, just the enemy of the people. The state utility, just the whole industry was in trouble. So, and because of this whole political process, there was a lot of rent-seeking opportunity, and within that opportunity, we saw that the need, especially with having Guatemala and El Salvador having done their reform over 20 years ago and having been able to reduce power, increase competition, eliminate blackouts completely, we had these neighbors who had done their job, done their homework and solved their problem while we were still stuck in the same problem. And the final, I think, kicker was that the debt, or the annual deficit from the state utility, was so large that it almost represented 50% of the government's annual deficit. And when the government tried to restructure its finances because of just economic hardship, like many other governments have, and trying to start to put out sovereign debt, because Honduras hadn't done that in decades also. The IMF came in to try to do a general structuring, a plan, a longer-term plan for the macroeconomics in the country, and part of that was you have to solve the energy problem. It was a main point in the agreements with the IMF, and I'm not here to defend or go against the IMF, but it did help that having that stability to propose solving the energy sector included unbundling the company and opening the markets. That was a very big effort that came, so not only from local dissatisfaction with the service, a company that was going under, and continuously funds needing to be shifted into the company that just wasn't getting its work done properly. And then he had the government finances, which got support. The reform gets support by international organizations like the IMF, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Central American Integration Bank, the World Bank. So kind of everyone on that club joined in on the unbundling of the state power company.
So it was a combination of factors that was just both internal dissatisfaction and people pushing from within the country, but also an external incentive. There was this incentive that they needed financing, and an international agreement helped to push the country into opening up markets for competition. So
absolutely, I think it was that, and we can see now that after 3 rounds of sovereign debt that have been issued, I think in the last probably 7 years, the first bonds were placed at around 11.5%, 10-year bonds. And this just 2 months ago, we had another emission, and those bonds were placed at just right around 5.5. And that has been part of that macro plan to fix and to promote some sort of predictability in the government's finances. The problem hasn't been fixed, but at least we're seeing the signs to come in, and now we're moving into a more competitive energy market, which should help solve some of these other issues, and at the end of the day, help to reduce the amount of cost of power and unleash some of the investment that we're trying to do. What the main effort is to improve the quality of life of all Hondurans.
I would like to move to our next panel, which is going to be, an introduction to some of the work that we've done at the Clean Capitalist Leadership Council and also Grace Richardson Fund that relates to the questions that we're dealing with today. we're going to be looking at clean tax cuts as an incentive for competition. And I don't know if everyone here is familiar with the clean tax cut concepts and the various ideas. So let me just unpack for you, how these came about. As I mentioned, at the beginning, one of our insights in 2016 that we brought to the table is that marginal tax rates for profitable, clean infrastructure deployment could make a lot of difference. And one of the things that's really interesting about it is that you're doing stuff to accelerate the private players. You're going to be accelerating competition versus the monopoly. If those incentives are available for competitive players, not monopolies, that will make a difference. We had a number of different frameworks for clean tax cuts initially. In the automobile sector, the average vehicle fleet emissions is one number that captures all of the information on sustainability, and it's well reported. So you could take that and use that as a tax modifier, reduce the taxes on business income taxes and investor taxes. And that would be a way to motivate behavior from the boardroom to the shop room floor. But one of the best ideas was proposed by a gentleman named Travis Bradford. Let me just tell you about Travis's innovation on the clean tax cut idea. Travis, he said to me, Rod, it's true that the automobile sector and the power sector have good solutions that can be advanced with equity side tax cuts, but they're on the demand side of capital. And if you take your supply side idea and put it on the supply side of capital and go to the capital markets for project finance, you're going to have some very interesting double-barreled impacts. So he was talking about tax-exempt debt, tax-exempt bonds, tax-exempt loans, and how these would accelerate clean infrastructure deployment.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll keep this very brief because I think you have taken this idea and really expanded on it in a lot of important ways, and actually making it very detailed with respect to the actual way that such a program can be structured. But the basic intuition is that the energy industry is one of the most capital intensive industries in the world. If you look at really the economics of how things play out, not only is it capital intensive, but it's increasingly so, particularly as we replace fuel-based energy generation, electricity generation with things that are far more capital in terms of their initial upfront cost. And so this capital intensive industry is getting more capital intensive. And if what you want to do is to induce people to put more of that capital to work, you actually need to try to drive down the cost of that financial capital that you use to amortize. I mean, and we all understand this when we've all bought long dated assets, even at low interest rates, a mortgage on a home or anything else. If you amortize something over a multi-decade time frame, the vast majority of the cost is actually in what you pay for the financial capital and not for the underlying physical capital. So even basis points or tens or hundreds of basis points in terms of which would be the result of a tax exempt structure for bonds and other forms of capital that you've expanded on in other places, it would have a meaningful impact in actually the delivery and the cost of delivering those energy services out of that capital. And so at the same time, what you're doing is you're making sure that the after-tax rates of return for investors are still high, but the cost of borrowing and the imputed cost of using those energy assets is low to the users. And that one change alone would have massive impacts. And if you look, I think from the point of view of stimulating markets, the amount of additional labor, construction, jobs that go into deploying that capital, you could actually see a meaningful payback, if you will, in terms of the loss of revenue from the upfront tax abatement of the capital that in other forms of revenue. And I know you've done some estimations on this, is that it could even be more. So it'll be interesting to talk more about this, but that's just the general intuition.
to underscore why these are so, what we call these is clean asset bonds and loans. They basically are tax exempt debt that finances a range of clean infrastructure. By driving down the cost of the debt by maybe 20 or 30%, you're driving down the cost of clean electricity, clean cars by a similar amount, because the cost of debt, cost of capital is so important in these projects. So you're getting a double-barreled impact of increasing demand and increasing supply at the same time. But you're also getting another double-barreled impact, because by driving down the cost of capital, you're applying a tax cut directly to financial leverage. And by doing that, you're driving up the return on equity, so that you're attracting tax-exempt debt investment and taxable equity investment at the same time. And this is extremely important for a clean infrastructure project, because most of these projects raise debt and equity at the same time. So you're doing something that is both very, very much more participatory than using tax equity, which only the largest players can play in, because it's so complicated and it only really benefits people with a huge tax appetite. But this is something where mom and pop, investors can play, and the debt side or the equity side, everybody can play. Smaller entrepreneurs can take advantage of it, but also it's incredibly cost effective, because you're giving up the tax expense where the revenues are low and taking in tax revenues where the revenues are high. In the US, average return on debt is about 4%. Average return on equity is about 13.6. So that means on a 50-50 capital stack, clean asset bonds and loans and equity, you're taking in 350% more revenue on the equity side than you're giving up on the debt side. So that might be an extremely cost-effective way to go about using an incentive like this. But Steve, we put this together with the help of the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. Steve Nadell is the executive director, and he's helped us with the initial charrette on how to apply this in real estate, and then how to take all of the different ideas that we developed for clean tax cuts and put them into a federal legislation package. And the idea that ended up rising to the top was this clean asset bonds and loans idea. And Steve, why don't you explain a little bit about the different areas that are different kinds of technologies that are covered in the Clean Free Market Act?
Happy to. Thank you. So yes, we try to include a lot of different types of clean technologies, but you have to define them very concretely or else. So we tended to use existing legislative definitions for various types of centralized renewables, for nuclear power, for combined heat and power, for carbon sequestration, electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, batteries. Also included zero energy homes and buildings using some DOE definitions and deep energy efficiency retrofits. So we've come up with, I think, a tightly defined package and developed legislative language. We're now trying to get this introduced. The challenges have been thus far, Congress basically has not authorized tax-exempt financing for private entities. There are some provisions where a local government can direct the money to a private entity, but they always have some type of government body entrepreneur. And when we talk to, Finance Committee, Republican staff, they're reluctant to go there. So we have to overcome that obstacle. The other obstacle we have to overcome is there's an awful lot of renewable energy and electric vehicles that might happen anyway. So providing them tax exempt financing is expensive. And as people will know, Republicans are reluctant to spend too much money. So that's something else we are thinking about how can we tighten eligibility.
Thank you, Steve. One of the points about this particular framework is that, yes, this would be a powerful way to incent competition, because it is something that really benefits the private developers, especially, who can react to this in a very entrepreneurial way. They see it dynamically and differently from how a state-run enterprise might see it. And so, Jigger, why don't you explain to us a little bit about how, as a entrepreneur, you would use these? What business model would you use to deploy these most effectively?
Well, I think that, what we care about is liquidity. And I think, as you and I have talked about before, the tax exempt debt market is actually a far more lucrative and far more forgiving space. And you see that in the solid waste space, where a lot of states actually issue their own tax exempt solid waste bonds for biofuels projects and recycling projects and all sorts of things, right? So I think once there is a market that doesn't require a PhD in the complexity of how to use those tools, like there is at the state level for the solid waste bonds, you can start to see an open marketplace to use these. And that then allows technologies that have that are misunderstood, that are less sort of mature, to fight equally for the right to participate, right? And today, for instance, fuel cells, I would suggest, are very mature technologies. They have access to a 30% ITC, but the investment tax credit buyers don't want to fund fuel cells because they're just so used to doing solar and wind. They don't want to figure something else out. But the tax exempt debt market doesn't have such qualms. For them, all the paper looks exactly the same. I think they're very much interested. I would say the same thing is true for energy efficient buildings, right? Which has had a hell of a time monetizing 179D credits. And so it really hasn't played the role that it was supposed to play, but you could imagine getting access to this sort of tax exempt municipal debt market would be a game changer for them. So I think part of this is really just opening up the scope around where people feel comfortable putting their time and effort into financing sustainability solutions that are outside of solar and wind.
Jigger, you've mentioned before about the number of projects which would pencil out, and how this changes the number of projects. Can you explain that, and also explain a little bit, what Generate Capital would do with these instruments?
Well, Generate participates on the leading edge of sustainability, right? So we're one of the largest investors in fuel cells, anaerobic digesters, renewable natural gas, combined heat and power, behind the meter battery storage. And so when you think about all these technologies that are basically all misunderstood by the broad commodity capital marketplace, they're also misunderstood by the broad debt marketplace, right? So the debt marketplace generally views credit as hell or high water payments, as defined by commercial banks, not project finance. And so when you think about what it would do for the cost of capital for all these sectors, it would drop them dramatically. We talk to 600 entrepreneurs a year and log all that effort. I'd say right now we probably have seen about $75 billion of projects that are actively underway in all of these sectors. And one of the challenges is that they get arrested in their place because the final financing solution isn't in place, right? So if people don't have confidence with the final financing solution is in place, you could imagine that development capital doesn't go into those markets, right? Because the way that development capital gets funded in the end is by knowing that the final offtake capital is there once the project is fully developed. And so I would say there's probably $70 to $75 billion of the projects that we've seen that would be unlocked by a policy like this.
So unlocking far more projects is one of the chief benefits of something like this. But one of the things that this does is it helps to speed the deployment of technologies that are scalable, which is important to do. And you know, by incentivizing competitors and competitive markets, it also incents innovation to the degree you have a bigger market. You know, it means that when a entrepreneur like yourself looks at a new innovative technology, what you look at is what's the market potential. The market potential is bigger if the more markets are open and the market is bigger, right? So, you know, one of the things that is important to do as well is to make sure that we are incenting early stage innovation, you know, in the right way, in a smart way. And, you know, these clean asset bonds don't directly incent that, but other folks other than, you know, the Clean Capitalist Leadership Council have been dissatisfied with traditional incentives and have pioneered some new ideas. So I wanted to turn to Jeremy Harrell, who is with ClearPath. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for co-hosting with us. I'd very much like you to explain how the ESIC is a departure from traditional subsidies and more tech neutral. This is another idea, and how that plays into the ClearPath vision for global markets.
I think that we're having a good conversation here about the dynamics in the marketplace. As we look at energy markets currently and look towards a drive towards a clean energy transition, we see a massive gap in the technology scale up among the technologies that exist currently that need to be done to meet emissions reductions, and a huge gap in the technologies we need globally. You know, ultimately, this is just one study, but you know, IEA has forecasted that the technologies that we need to meet emissions reductions to meet some of these mid-century decarbonization goals. 35% of emissions for those, 35% of the emission reductions that we need come from technologies that are only in the prototype or the demonstration phase, and 45% of those comes from technologies that aren't widely deployed. So there's a clear gap here across the economy, and that's not just in the power sector as a whole, that's across the sectors of the economy, of being able to bring these technologies forward, make them cost competitive, and let the free market take off. And so as we look in trying to find ways to bridge that gap, how do we get initial technologies deployed? I think there's a lot of different things along the paradigm that we need. As we look at the power sector here in the US, that's what the Energy Sector Innovation Credit's looking at doing, is we look and say, okay, we want to scale up a broad suite of technologies, and we don't know what those technologies necessarily going to be. You know, there's proposals out there to say that if we have breakthroughs in storage, we can get to higher penetrations of renewables and combined with long duration storage. Great. If we need to use carbon capture with natural gas, advanced nuclear technologies, flexible firm geothermal technologies, we're kind of agnostic on the technologies front on the path towards deep decarbonization, but we are not agnostic on the attributes that we need for the grid. And so the Energy Sector Innovation Credit is specifically targeted at just that, the attributes that we need from generation assets in just the power sector. This is the power sector centric proposal, and moving it forward. And we try to get at some of these dynamics that are a challenge in competitive electricity markets. And to the point that you were making, Rod, of how do we make this usable for a broader suite of taxpayers, right? Because the way that traditional investment tax credits and production tax credits, like the solar PTC and the PTC, you either have to have some type of middleman on the financial sector side for these, or you have to have a big corporate that's got significant tax appetite, right? And so the Energy Sector Innovation Credit is let's see, I want to show one slide here, but it's not letting me demonstrate it, but it kind of gives you exactly those points. How is it different from existing credits? One, it's technology inclusive. It's focused on attributes, not necessarily the generation type. So it's not an investment credit for X or Y technology. It's about emissions reductions in areas, and it's in the performance of the asset and what it provides to the grid. Two, it's not a price per kilowatt hour like the wind production tax credit, for example. It's a credit based off the percentage of revenue you get from putting electricity on the grid. And so that makes it so it's not distortive like we've seen the PTC be in wholesale electricity markets like PJM, for example. You're not getting negative pricing events. You're not you're essentially incentivizing power where it's needed most and when it's needed most. And so that's a key difference. And then, getting at the conservative principle, in the end, this credit is not meant to be a deployment subsidy in perpetuity by any means. This is supposed to be a robust incentive to bridge the gap between deploying things out of the early stage, whether you come through the labs, you come out of academia, you come out of entrepreneurs trying to deploy things early, and get you to show that you're commercially viable, learn by doing, so bridge the gap. Whenever we build something, it's always going to be more expensive the first time we do it, and we learn by doing, right? And so the credit is most robust at those early stages when you barely have been deployed in the commercial marketplace, and the credit goes all the way away once that technology represents somewhere between 1% and 3% of the electricity grid. At 3% of U.S. generation, it goes away completely, and you're ineligible for it. So it tries to get at some of those key areas where, one, we've seen previous policies fail. Two, make it more attractive to a broader swath of taxpayers. And three, not subsidize stuff that's never going to be commercially competitive, because ultimately we think that clean has to be cost competitive with its alternatives, right? That's how we truly deploy globally these technologies. As we look at the developing world, there's many places where we don't have the luxury of making the choice between attributes like clean and purely providing power to people. And so these technologies need to be cost competitive, and that's what this policy is trying to drive at. It drives at that specific purpose. It's not an end-all be-all, and it's why I think it's a piece of the larger financing puzzle that's going to be needed to drive global clean energy transition.
Yeah, thank you. Jeremy. I'm not generally a fan of tax credits, but this seems to be a huge improvement over the older style tax credits that are technology specific and don't phase out and reward the wrong things. So, to make things that are level technology neutral and phase out this way, it could be something that works in conjunction with clean asset bonds and loans to make sure that you're bringing new technologies and entrants into the market, and when they're mature, they can play with the rest of the competitors, making those energy markets even more competitive with more choices for different kinds of cleaner generation and maybe even clean base load, which is the holy grail of what we're really trying to get to.
Right.
So,
yeah, and I'd be really curious to hear from Jigger in particular, and maybe someone else, of how they think these tax dynamics are playing differently in the current state of the economy. I mean, we're hearing from a lot of folks that the cost of capital is dirt cheap at this point, and so how has the COVID economic slowdown changed things? How have the current economic conditions change what the need is, particularly here in the short term? Because I think, one, there's going to be a huge policy opportunity here in the next 2 to 5 years of how do we get out of this kind of significant economic downturn that I think is unprecedented in how it's impacted the wide swath of the economy. And two, how does that turn on the head some of the economic assumptions that we've been thinking about, and frankly, were challenges that we were looking to tackle that may no longer be the challenge and forward. So I'd be really curious to hear from folks like Jigger who are financing these projects, how things have changed as a result of kind of the current state of affairs.
Well, unfortunately, we will have to pull you into a conversation with Jigger later because he has had to go to another thing that he has to do. So he was only with us for the first hour to warm us up. But I do want to say that, one of the key things about the ClearPath vision as enunciated by Rich Powell in front of the Ways and Means Committee, you've been very strong about how, we need to, innovate technologies and then sell them around the world. I think what we're trying to do here today is think about ways to bridge the policy gap between innovation and selling it around the world, opening up markets. And we're going to be going to a brainstorming session to think about opening markets in 5 minutes. We're going to take a 5-minute break now. But as I promised, Guillermo, while we're taking a break, people can, go do what they need to do. But in 5 minutes, Guillermo, please explain what is the challenge you're facing in Honduras right now? What is the threat that your opening up of the power market is under? So folks can understand what we're up against.
Sounds good. We'll be ready. 5 minutes.
No. Go ahead. Do it right now.
Right?
People will take a break if they need to, but I wanted to fill up this time, use our time as we can. So we're on a break. If people need to take a break, go ahead. But you explain it and people. I'm sure the people who are interested will stay on.
All right. Well, thank you. So we in this past year, once the system, I was telling you earlier, the system operator came officially into effect or in charge of managing the system dispatch and setting up the spot market in June of last year. So we've only been, I would say, fully functional with for just over 12 months. Hiring people, hiring technology, or contracting technology, and starting to train, I would say, some of the new agents in the market. We started the large consumer, we call them Qualified Consumer Association, which I currently have the seat inside the system operator. That gives me a really good angle by being having to wear the hat for qualified consumers. As as consumers, what we want is reliable power, access, at the lowest price possible and at the highest quality possible. So with that angle, it's a good way. We needed that association and these large consumers to come into the market to balance the market process and to set up the buy side in the system. Companies, large businesses are not used to having an energy department within their operations, or hiring and negotiating with generators or wholesalers. So this is a big process that's going on right now. And as I said earlier, I'm happy to say that after months of regulatory work and meetings, this week the first qualified consumer was approved as a registered agent by the regulators. But I would say some of the difficulties that we have are kind of retraining the financial system to understand a competitive energy system in order to how to finance new projects or expand current projects without a permanent purchasing power agreement with the state power utility. Another difficulty is getting the general public to understand that the change in the energy system, the deregulating the energy system, and opening up for competition means that the general public also has to start trusting the new system. And in order to create trust, what we've been doing, I'd say, from both the regulators and the system operator side, is publishing as much information as possible, allowing for the participation from agents into the regulatory process and the new normatives, putting out data, which some of you might be surprised, but it wasn't until I think it was November or December, probably around there, that for the first time the system operator made public the real-time aggregate energy demand for the whole country by technology. And just putting out that information, it used to be a state secret. Having that information within the state power company was a state secret, and now it's publicly available information. And that's the type of work that we're doing, is how to build trust in a new system where people and actors don't really know how to function. So I would like to
Guillermo, if I may, what I we don't have a lot of time for this, so if you could very briefly, what is the threat right now from the operator who got the contract, the 12-year contract?
So what the threats right now are to finish with the way things were being done before. So one of the things now is that all contracts, or anyone that wants to sell power into the system, can only do it through two ways: or an international bidding process that is supervised by the regulators, or a spot market process. which is, you don't have a contract and you're totally open into competition. That's selling into the grid. But if you want to have your private contracts, now you can do with the large consumers. So those are the only two ways, and we have to protect that all contracts go through this institutional process. If we are not able to comply with that, then we're weakening the institutions that are just starting to mature. Would this be the right time to get Jose and Kevin's input into some of these difficulties?
Well, we just need to, like in 1 minute, tell us about exactly what's going on with this new contract, the emergency contract, and how that threatens the system. Give us, because we really have to move to the next section.
Okay, so the contracts, as I said, need to go through a authorized regulator process. And we have a case right now of a process that did not go through that. And because it's in an area that needs attention, there's an energy deficit and outages in the sector, and the community and businesses are in need of stabilizing that grid. So that need from the local population gave congressmen the opportunity to be able to push for contracts in a way in which they thought were fixing a problem. So if we don't move the market system fast enough and mature these new institutions fast enough, then the political process reaches back and bites us again. And in order to prevent from the political process, which becomes not a technical issue and becomes a how to solve or win the next election for a congressman or for any mayor or any other politician, then what we need to do is move fast with the right advisors, with the right technology, to create as quick as possible trust in the new bidding process system, and have that energy come in and be delivered to solve the energy crisis in the country, which this summer we had another, we've been rationing power for the last several summers during the dry season when all hydros and wind basically go out of service.
Right. So just to summarize, one of the things that's going on right now for you is that there's been this emergency contract that's awarded that basically violates the competitive market process. And because it's expanded from 3 to 12 years and uses bunker fuel instead of even diesel, it's extremely dirty. And it's also, perhaps threatening plans to introduce upgrades to the transmission lines to allow for cross-border competition. Is that a good, correct summary of what's going on?
I would say, yeah, that's accurate. What we need is because even though the contract isn't huge, the important is to protect institutions, because once you have the institutional process safe, then the predictability in the system is better, and that allows for new projects to be financed, and not only in the generation side, but for the first time, we're preparing to open up for private transmission operators, which we've never had that. Guatemala and El Salvador already have that, but having that will help us, because according to the budget set in the State Power Company and the loans that they've gone from international funding organizations, they can only reach for almost between a third and a fourth of the financial needs that the system needs in order to stabilize the national grid. So there's a lot of space for private investment, and in order to provide space for private investment, we need to make sure that institutions are safe and functioning as quick as possible, but with the right signaling as possible, in order to be able to provide the trust that private investment needs.
Great. So we are going to move now, Guillermo, thank you very much, to a discussion, the part of our session that deals with brainstorming new free market incentives and trade strategies to open markets faster. So we'll be looking at US proposals and also maybe even international proposals and throwing out in a rapid fashion ideas, but hopefully some of those ideas will deal with how to protect, and encourage the kind of market reforms that are going on in Honduras, but also keeping in mind that, look, these processes are under threat by companies that don't want competitive markets, that still want to do things by getting, Congress to subvert the competitive process. So what can we do? In any event, we're going to move, and Steve Nadell, my co-host, is a really fantastic facilitator for these brainstorming ideas, and we have some straw proposals which I circulated to the other participants. I think the attendees have also gotten them, though I'm not sure. But we can talk about those, but maybe first we could just sort of throw it open to the floor and see who has some good proposals for how to move markets in a more competitive direction. Steve, you want to, and maybe just show hands if you, have a proposal that you'd like to make. I know Jim Connaughton, always has a few good ideas, which I'd like to hear. But Steve, please set us up.
Okay, so yes, this is a brainstorming exercise. I will try to briefly write them in a Word file, and at the end I will share those ideas for a discussion later this afternoon. But please suggest ideas. I know Rod and I have a couple, but we'll put those at the end. I don't know whether Jim wants to kick it off or someone else. I would say any idea, maximum of 1 minute. This is a brainstorm, not a time to, summarize your PhD dissertation.
I think we have a hand up from Marcin Branowski, who is also our co-host and the director of the new director of the British Conservation Alliance.
Okay.
Marcin,
have a minute, Marcin.
Well, we can give Marcin a few extra minutes. He's co-hosting, for God's sakes.
Thank you so much, Rod, and thank you, Steve, and thank you for the invitation for us to co-host this wonderful event. So basically, what we are currently doing as government is, in order to combat climate change, is to spend money abroad on aid or on various projects, trying to get them to change their policies, change how they function. Or we just try to subsidize stuff at home, basically throw money wherever we see fit. And the idea basically is to switch this responsibility from the governments and into the private sector for them to be able to do it instead. So we make it as easy as possible for the private investors to spend money abroad on green innovations, on spreading the already developed projects that we have in Western countries, in developed countries, in countries that already managed to start decreasing their environmental impact. And we can do that through various different proposals. Most of them were already mentioned, but I'll gladly put them back up, including, for example, the clean asset bonds and loans, or the co-victory bonds, which I don't think were mentioned yet. But overall, the idea is to work together for the countries on one side and on the other, as the finance would flow both sides, to foster financing on the projects that we want to be greener, on projects that we want to be more beneficial for the environment. So in this case, it would be, for example, making these kind of investments tax exempt for both of the countries, so that you can invest easier. Let's say, for example, in Bangladesh, and neither the Bangladeshi government is taxing you for the profits, nor is the British government taxing you for the profits. So both of these sides are fostering this, are encouraging you to invest. And because you are doing that, they don't have to do it instead of you. So they are saving money on these projects because you are, as a private investor, paying for that. And that would allow us to basically save the money as the governments, and on the other hand, allow the private investors to get more profit out of that rather than just have the governments do both the investing and the profiteering part. Sorry if I was speaking very fast. I just was pressured by the time restraints.
No worries.
Okay, thank you, Marston. Other ideas, raise your hands.
Andrew Brackle here. Could I give you an idea? Yeah, I wanted to ask the panel about patent boxes. As a patent box is where you, in a country, you develop the research and development and investment, or invest in research and development to create a patent of some sort of new technology, and the revenues deriving from that patent are taxed at a much lower rate. So corporate income tax of, say, whatever, 5% or 4% or something like that. Some very, very strongly preferential tax rate. Now, those have been criticized by the OECD for being, sort of an unfair or harmful tax competition. But one of the things, if we did it for a green technology, we say if you develop a patent at a green technology, you're taxed at a much lower rate. It could be a neat way of doing it to really incent a whole lot of innovation in the green space. But also, one of the things I wanted to ask you, Mr. Nadal, is because you had talked about what types of projects qualify for green technology. And so if you created a green patent box that was sort of narrow and tightly constrained versus one that's very, very broad, because we were thinking the risk is always that people get into patent boxes because in order to get that preferential tax rate. But if someone's building machinery or something, machinery and equipment, and they say, hey, if we put a green angle on this, if it's really, there's really good energy efficiency, then we might benefit from that green patent box or that lower tax rate. You could pull a whole bunch of investments in different sectors into more green technology by having a broader definition. So anyways, that's the one I wanted to contribute.
Okay, thank you. And very briefly to respond, the problem we've had is so many technologies qualify, it gets expensive, but if you limit it just to new patents, not existing patents, that might be one way to narrow it down and make it more affordable. Other ideas?
Well, I see that we have a few questions, maybe not more answers, but this might get the ball rolling from Isha Rege. What is the most exciting or unexpected advance in this fight to make the market open? Would some of those in the industry like to take a crack at that?
And also, keep that in mind. We'll come to that in a couple of minutes, but any other ideas? Rod, did you have another idea you want to put on this brainstorm list before we shift focus a little bit?
Sure. There are a number of different, I think that what Marcin was getting at is the idea of tax reciprocity, but for, different kinds of tax advantage, investing in green technologies between countries. That might be one of the things that I think is the potential for something like that. If you had tax exempt clean asset bonds and loans or co-victory bonds and loans, which maybe I should discuss, as well, is that you would essentially enable, you would create an incentive, perhaps, for free trade and competition, because countries would, the potential for vastly increased capital flows from these tax advantage incentives would be an incentive for countries to join a framework that allows more competition and to allow more opening of markets. So potentially you could, introduce those as a competitive incentive internationally, which I think is an intriguing idea.
Okay, one last one.
Well, we have a request from Michael Leifman. Please say hello, introduce yourself, your affiliation, and go ahead with your question or your idea.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, my name is Michael Leifman. I'm with Temley Consulting in Washington, D.C. And my idea would be to have some sort of additional competition within the framework of performance-based regulation, right? PBR. So PBR already provides utilities with additional flexibility to be creative in how they meet the regulators' goals. So potentially add an additional incentive, some sort of competition for the utilities under the regulatory authority to decrease CO2 emissions within their fleet or within their offering somehow. So that could be funded either by some sort of public benefits charge and put in escrow for the competition winner. There are a bunch of different ways to fund it, but PBR gives the framework for utilities to be creative, so it can be used to incentivize more CO2 reduction.
Okay, thank you. I was going to mention one. He wasn't. Sam Thurstrom has been working with Representative McKinley in Schrader's office and wasn't able to make this. But they've been working on an idea to have a bunch of incentives, R&D investment and tax incentives for innovation investments that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and really encourage innovation, but as a way to get broad support, including from Democrats, have a backstop of a clean energy standard that hopefully would not be needed because the innovations take off, but would reassure people who are not positive the innovations would work, that there is a backstop. So McKinley's a Republican, Schrader's a Democrat, but it is an attempt to, come up with something that might be politically feasible, given we don't know the results of the election, but it's close to 50-50. And you need both parties if you're really going to enact something. So I'll put that one on the list. Mm-hmm. Any other ideas?
So let me just say that there are some other ideas that I know the participants couldn't be here at this time that they're going to be floating and discussing. Shankar Singham will be joining us at 3 o'clock to talk about addressing anti-competitive market distortions with trade agreements, which is a really interesting proposal for a new way to open up markets, considering them in trade agreements. In addition, Wayne Weingarten will be joining us a little later, and he is, one of the co-authors with me on this co-victory bond and loan proposal, but I think I'd rather let Wayne describe it than myself. Though, just to keep the ball rolling on some new ideas before we move to the next panel, just to throw a couple of things out there for people to consider in the following discussions. We'll be talking about exploring strategies for opening up markets in the United States. There's a couple of ideas for disincentives for monopolies and for subsidies and for incentivizing monopolies to demonopolize. Let me just explain those very quickly. One policy, could be a federal policy that simply says no subsidies for monopolies. Why are we subsidizing monopolies? Why, we now know that competitive power markets deliver decarbonization faster and cheaper and basically deliver cheaper energy. And we don't need them because we know that there are markets that can operate competitively. So why waste federal money? Why waste consumer money? Why not just say, we're not going to let, monopoly generators take advantage of tax credits or tax exempt debt? That's only going to be for competitive players. Another idea is a little bit more friendly to the monopoly, which is demonopolization tax cuts. The idea that we can basically provide a carrot to help with any demonopolization legislation at the state level. So this would have to be done in conjunction with state and federal coordination. But the idea is that a monopoly, investors would be rewarded for demonopolizing and breaking up their monopoly and unbundling and allowing competition, because when they sell off the assets, they would not be taxed on the gains, so that they would really get a large profit, from doing so, but it is a profit that would not be taxed. And it's the nice thing about it is there's no real federal tax expense because this is a sale that would not have happened without the enabling legislation. The monopoly simply would have continued, so that that selling off of the assets wouldn't have happened. Those are a couple of ideas, and then a final idea that I would throw up on the boards.
Rod,
is yes.
As to that last idea, one thing I'd like to throw out there, and along those lines, is we've got an example from Congress doing the opportunity zones policy in the tax bill that was done a couple years ago. And there's this concept that essentially if you invest in these zones and you maintain your money, your equity interest in that for an extended period of time, I think in that case it's 10 years, that you get a break on cap gains tax. And I wonder if there's some ideas out there in general on similar, like if you invest in climate tech or something along those lines, and we were willing for it to hold, and I use 10 years just as an example because it's that law, that you get some type of cap gains break, like how that might help venture capital invest in climate tech and drive some more private sector investment into the industry as a whole, and kind of capitalize on this kind of big opportunity. So I think it's something to think about as well.
Okay.
That's a great idea. I see we have a hand raised from Isha Reggae. Can you unmute yourself?
Second, please, Rod.
What?
1 second, please.
Or maybe we go to Michael? Or is that Michael already?
Yes. I believe it's 2:34 where our next session is going to begin.
Okay, good.
We'll circle back around to these questions.
Great.
Okay, then I will share very briefly the screen so people can see the ideas that we brainstormed.
Great.
And Haley, I will email this list to you, and I will let you use it going forward as you see fit, as in going forward for these discussions.
Oh, great.
That's fantastic. A terrific starting point. Thank you, Steve.
That's good. Steve, before we move on, let me just throw one more idea out there very quickly, because I just love ideas. But the one, and this is pertinent for COP26 coming up in next year. It is going to be hosted by the UK in Glasgow in November of 2021. And they have a responsibility, it says, as host to raise the climate ambitions of the signatories of the Paris Accord. Now, most free marketeers think that these commitments are, basically a little bit empty promises and maybe very expensive. But from a free market perspective, one kind of way to raise commitments, might be, considering that many nations are reluctant to raise their commitments because they're wondering how expensive these are going to be, what it's going to do to their economy to put these high commitments in. If you say, we're going to raise our commitment, but it's going to be a commitment to do this by free market means, then what you end up doing is promoting free market solutions. We call this common commitments, or clean open market international commitments is the name of the proposal. Common commitments. And it would be a proposal framework for raising NDCs, but it is tied to capital C-O, it's C-O-M-I-N. It's an acronym. Yes, clean open market international commitments. And it is a framework that for raising NDCs that is conditioned on this being done by free market means. So you have to have policies that remove tax, trade, and regulatory barriers, and especially that open markets to clean solutions. So this is a framework that more countries should be willing to adopt, because this won't hurt them economically. It will only help them economically. So it may be a framework that allows more countries to do that, for Britain to meet its obligations, to raise commitments, and yet we don't just give free market solutions a seat at the table, we provide a whole bench. And they'd be notably missing there at the UN, but this is one way to move forward. Anyway,
what does the N stand for?
International.
Oh, okay, fine. Thank you.
Right. So, but in any event, I think we have to move to our next segment, which will be on exploring new strategies for clean open markets in the United States. And maybe what we can do is reflect on some of these proposals, and the folks that are the key experts in this can raise their own suggestions for what we should do. But I think that our two session leaders for this are Sarah Hunt, a co-host from the Rainey Center. Sarah, are you on the line? You'll have to unmute yourself.
There.
Oh, great.
Free graduate degrees, but I can't work a Zoom meeting.
Well, we have Sarah and we have Lynn Kiesling, and I know you both have brought some excellent guests with you. But why don't we start with Lynn, and then you can tell us what you think of some of these ideas and what you think would be a better idea, or how to improve some of these ideas, because these are only meant to be rough straw proposals. And I think that you are ideally one of the people, and some of the people you've invited, who can help us improve these ideas.
Thanks, Rod. And hi, Sarah.
Hi, Lynn. It's so good to see you.
How are you?
I'm great.
I think in exploring new strategies for clean open markets, one area that comes from my work, and I'm going to first pull in Travis Kavula to make some remarks about this, is the extent to which, and it complements the brainstorming and some of the more tax-focused proposals that we've been discussing. But I think one thing that is an important piece of leverage is the extent to which technological change and innovation has broad and deep decentralizing forces. And again, I'm going to say this as a technology historian, that we see this over and over, that there certainly have been plenty of technologies that have had centralizing forces, but right now, especially with digitization and how digitization is entering the electricity industry with smart grid technologies all the way through the supply chain, and especially digitization around the distribution edge, which enables consumers to participate more actively in retail markets, but to use technology to automate their participation so that it's user-friendly and the costs to them are low of doing it. In other words, digital technologies reduce transaction costs, and it makes it easier and more valuable to coordinate our actions through markets than through regulation. And so I think that potential for technology-enabled competitive markets is one real opportunity. So with that, I'm going to invite Travis to make some remarks on that.
Yeah. Hey, Lynn, Rod, thanks for having me. I've been listening to the conversation with great interest. I'm a former utility regulator and now an executive in charge of regulation with NRG, which is a large independent power producer, mostly based in Texas. We have about 4 million retail customers. And unlike a utility, any of those customers are free to fire us as their provider. We're a competitive service provider. We do not have a monopoly service territory. And I guess I'd really emphasize the importance of that point, because I think only when you sort of focus on the end user, what they're ultimately going to need, get more dynamism in the system that Lynn alluded to, are you really going to make the ends meet of a very deep decarbonized world that is going to have a lot of intermittent sources of supply. And I guess to this point, a lot of the conversation has been focused on
how do you channel more capital into clean technologies? I guess I would maybe focus a little bit more from the ground up and trying to unlock some of the consumers that still exist behind legal barriers. I mean, the United States today, more than half the states still exist in a paradigm where consumers have no choice in where they get their electricity or natural gas supply. Instead, they're served by monopolies, entities who have the legal right to serve them. And that creates all sorts of perverse incentives that affect some of these upstream conversations. I mean, monopolies are largely indifferent, actually, to the statutory tax rate because they recover it from their ratepayers. Actually, ironically, they often prefer a higher tax rate because in the presence of other policies that allow them to claim tax deductions without flowing them through their consumers, a high tax rate gives them headroom to make some of those claims and essentially produce cash flow. So, for example, in the 2017 tax reform, there was one industry negatively affected, said the ratings agencies, by the reduction of a 35% tax rate to 21%, and that was regulated utilities. So a lot of the policies that you would think would actually augment capital deployment in the industry often don't have that intended effect. And the real question is, I think, how to make sure capital productivity is heightened in the industry, and how to unlock those end use consumers so other companies can reach in across the monopoly and essentially grab them, serve them with other devices. To that end, one thing to add to Steve's list, I think, is a really interesting, very simply written concept out of the House Democrats' Clean Future Act, which would establish a right to clean electricity on the part of any consumer nationally. This would not be a full liberalization of the market, but consumers would have the right to purchase clean energy around their incumbent utility, and it would be left to the definition of regulators what constituted sufficiently clean. So you can bring in some of the discussions that Jeremy from ClearPath was happening about how to firm and shape the energy to make sure that it's not just some kind of arbitrage with RECs or renewable energy. But ultimately, to keep this short, I really think more focus needs to be on that demonopolization. And we've already scoped a couple of really interesting concepts: the ability to keep capital gains if a utility sort of sold off its entanglements that keep it in a monopoly position. Just doing things like that, I think, are well worth the attention, because ultimately this is going to have to be about those end use consumers and creating value for them. One final thought to Lynn's point, and it's been a bit of a Texas love fest, but I might as well contribute something new on Texas. What we're really seeing there is, for the first time in the history of electricity markets, a very active demand side of the market. And so, classically, demand and supply have to equilibrate with one another at some point in any two-sided market. But that never really has happened very well in electricity markets because, people are not facing the real-time price signals of electricity, and they turn on their lights. They're not making sort of instantaneous decisions in response to prices. Now, in the presence of a highly competitive retail market in Texas, there are a lot of intermediary companies that can finally have visibility into those price signals and create automation within the homes of even residential customers. So you now see about 1/5 of Texas customers having voluntarily adopted price responsive demand products that are offered to them. And we just know that if supply is going to become more intermittent over the course of time, you're going to need more flexibility on the demand side, and really only a highly competitive retail market, as opposed to a retail market that's dominated by a monopoly, is going to be capable of making that engine work in an economically efficient way that's actually trying to tap that flexibility through product offers to consumers. Thank you.
Travis, I love hearing you talk about these things. I feel like my head has expanded 3 sizes.
I love the fact that he likes the demonopolization tax cuts. I just threw that out there. I thought I was going to get mocked.
No, I think that's great. One other
if you can't beat them, join them, right? These are powerful. These are powerful entities, right? And utilities probably can't be steamrolled or demonopolized without a huge fight. So maybe there's a carrot. And the beauty of it, Rod, is that it doesn't have to work for everyone. But I bet are one or two utilities who look at the financials and say, you know what, that's not a bad deal, and would be willing to throw in stakes and maybe experiment with that.
And I think this conversation highlights the point that in many respects, the attention has to be in the details, because utilities can have contracts with PPAs with independent renewable generators, and they can say, oh, we do competitive procurement, and so I think the attention is going to have to be in the details. One other piece of attention, and then I'm going to see if Jim Connaughton wants to come in on this, because I think his thoughts on this may dovetail nicely with Travis's, that regulatory policy and especially over the past 20 years has very much focused on the idea of capacity, building capacity so that we can ensure reliability by having enough installed capacity of generation. Travis has pointed out that going forward, what's going to be the most important attribute of resources is going to be flexibility. And so I think that means that encouraging regulators to shift their awareness towards performance and towards capabilities and away from the ideas of just having installed capacity. So Jim, I don't know if you want to chime in here or.
Sure, I'll offer a few concepts. I try not to talk too much because it looks like I'm on 3 panels today for the rest of the day. So I want to emphasize the theme. Lynn writes brilliantly about quarantine the monopoly, and I will add to that, which is bypass the monopoly. Okay, so the analogy I'll give, I was at Constellation Energy. We all sat down one day in 2009 and said, okay, we're in X number of states. How do we get in every state, including Canada and down in Mexico? Just what can we do? Where are we allowed to participate in the energy market wherever we can, rather than only duke it out trying to change the regulatory paradigm? And over the course of just 4 years, we found ourselves in energy businesses in 47 states. Notwithstanding Travis's point that half of them theoretically don't let you in. And that's where the opportunity now, 10 years later, is even greater than then to bypass the monopoly. First of all, as we get away from large central station coal, and we're not building new large central station nuclear, everything else can be fully distributed, and it can all be behind the meter. Okay, so there's actually no limitation on bypassing the monopoly in terms of the energy componentry that's coming next. You just have to decide you want to do it, and the headaches and the other things that come with that. But that is a huge opportunity for the private sector to reorient what's going on and create back pressure on the vertically integrated regulated utilities. So just behind the meter generation is a key opportunity. The emergence of IoT and machine learning is going to bring forward the tools in the next 10 years. It will bring transparency to the grid that is currently in the hands of the shamans. If you want to go interconnect with the utility, it's a exceedingly painful process, and it's a not that rock process, which is you go through a 1-year process, and they'll say, "Oh, sorry, that won't work. Give me another location." And then you do that one. They say, "Oh, sorry, that won't work." So the ability to bring transparency through the digital transformation. To one, just create sort of knowledge and pressure, but two, I think it can lead to a simpler form of legislated right or regulated right, which is the right to interconnect. So if you can, in a timely way, where you can show transparently that it doesn't affect the overall operation of the grid, in fact, could support it. So I think there's a way to lever into the monopoly structure, no different than doing an RPS. An RPS is basically actually legislators saying we need to do an end run around what the utilities are investing in, and now we're going to do an end run around that and create a market-based instrument for accomplishing that. I mean, an RPS, in my view, is just an end run around the monopoly. And then finally, with actually the timeliness of the FERC order this week, we have not fully imagined the digitally enabled wholesale aggregation for participation of manifold players just jumping into the wholesale market through intermediates and qualifying for wholesale market participation. So we haven't really explored that in any consequential way. You know, PGM has had its experiments in that, Texas has them. But I think there's a, you know, I don't know, I'd be interested in other people's views, but I think there's a viable approach that's technology enabled now to aggregate wholesale participation, notwithstanding some of the other apparent legal barriers to that. So that's what I'll put on the table.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. I'm all in favor of digitization, reducing transaction costs all the way up and down the stack and around the distribution edge. So yay. I'm going to pass the baton to Sarah since we are running short on time.
Yeah. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate that. I will say that one of the top 5 moments of my life was in the back of an Uber with Jim in San Francisco. And we were talking about a policy issue, and he told me that I noticed something that he hadn't thought of yet. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to beat that very many times. So it's always an honor to be on a panel with him, and of course with you and Travis as well. Today, I am not the main event. We have 2 great policymakers from the Rainey Center's LAMP program, the Leadership Alliance for a More Perfect Union, Delegate Daniel Linville of West Virginia and Representative Sharon Jackson from Alaska. They're both from great energy states, and I thought it would be interesting to bring them into the conversation and let you hear from them what's going on the ground in their states, get their reaction to the ideas that have been presented, and especially their thoughts as policymakers who are in states that, you know, are traditionally associated with the fossil industry and who are looking for options to maintain a vibrant economy for their constituents. So with that, I will call on Delegate Linville. Would you like to hop in and give us some reflections and thoughts? Let us know what you're thinking today about what you've heard and what's going on in West Virginia and the view from there.
Sure. Well, first, thanks, Sarah. And I really appreciate you having brought us on here today. I think one of the big things that we see in West Virginia is that, you know, while we've always been a coal producing state, and we are very proud of that, in fact, we're proud that we were powering the nation for so long. We have a few interesting challenges in trying to make sure that our economy sort of reacts to the market. And so it's been really interesting to hear some of the proposals that have been put forward. You know, I don't know of anybody who is really in favor of a monopoly, right? So some sort of a tax incentive to demonopolize, I think, is an incredible idea. The next thing, and just a little quick personal point of privilege, just this year, I actually sponsored a piece of legislation with our House Speaker, Roger Hanshaw, that was taken sort of that wasn't well received. Let me say it that way. And that was, we were trying to, make West Virginia one of the best places in the nation to hold intellectual property and patents. And so I absolutely love the idea of sort of a patent box that would make West Virginia an interesting place to hold that intellectual property and to begin to replace some of that economic engine. If over time we lose power plants or we lose some of the other generation, you know, how do we incentivize companies to continue to replace that economic engine that we've seen for so many years has really begun to harm our economy? And so I think that was an incredible thing, and I'd love to follow up with the individual that sort of suggested that. It might be a way for us to handle something that we further tried to do. And the last thing that I would say is, the challenge that we see in West Virginia is in the transmission side of things, right? And so as we look at a more decentralized grid, how do you make sure that everyone is paying their fair share on the transmission side of things? Because we don't want someone who, for instance, can't afford solar behind the meter to end up negatively affected and paying a significantly greater amount just for the transmission infrastructure. And I think that's one of the biggest things, and maybe we can learn something from Texas as it regards that. So Sarah, that's a lot, and thanks for having me on the panel.
Great. Yeah, thank you for those thoughts. I really think it's helpful for everyone here to hear from policymakers about what's going on the ground.
Sarah, could I just jump in for a second, to respond to Daniel? The person who came up with the green patent box suggestion is Hendrik Brackel, the chief economic advisor to the Canadian opposition. And I think that's really significant, because wouldn't it be great if we can do a trans-border, Canada-US green patent box and maybe spread it to other countries of the world, so that you get a green stimulus and intellectual property protection at the same time. Food for thought.
Absolutely. I would love to engage in that, because it turns out that patent law is pretty formalized and across all the states. And if you touch that section of law, there's some people that sort of come out of the woodwork, very concerned that you might have a tortuous environment and things of that nature. So the fact that it was that the suggestion is to handle it on the tax basis and make that what's the most beneficial was just incredible. So I've actually already texted the Speaker of the House while we've been on this Zoom meeting. So thank you.
Oh, great, wonderful.
Great. This is the power of LAMP. We connect our policymakers with experts like all of you. With that, I'd like to bring in Representative Sharon Jackson from Eagle River, Alaska. I'm sure she has some equally interesting thoughts. So I will hand it over to her.
Hello, everyone. This has been absolutely amazing and very beneficial. Post-COVID, here in Alaska, there are many opportunities I see coming. So hearing the input from you and different ideas of legislation that can support the movement of these major projects is, I just can't express the gratitude of this opportunity that I have here today. So thank you all, and I look forward to continuing to communicate and bring these ideas together. Thank you so much.
Sharon, was there anything in particular that really struck you? Any of the ideas that stood out that you'd like to explore further as potentially good for Alaska?
Sharon, you're muted. We can't hear you. Please unmute yourself.
Unmute. Okay, thank you. So what I was saying, what I was saying, the last idea that was mentioned about sharing patents across, I find that very, very instrumental, and believe it will benefit all of us. So thank you.
It sounds like I need to do a Rainey Center paper on state deployment of green patents. Thank you so much, Sharon. And thank you, Daniel, as well. I really appreciate both of you being here and sharing your thoughts with this crowd. And I think I can't follow up that with anything much more interesting. So I will turn it back over to Lynn and Rod.
Lynn, let me just say you also have the expertise of Pat Wood here. We should move on, but I did want Pat to weigh in, if he wants to, on what he thinks are the most interesting ideas for moving to accelerating the move to competitive markets in the United States that he's heard. So please, if you have a moment, Pat.
I do. I'm not able. So the host has turned off my video for some reason. I guess I was chewing my chips. But the demonopolization tax credit did have a small twin back in the early days of FERC RTO policy, when a tax advantage was given to utilities if they divested their transmission system. So it was just for part of it, but it worked with one state in Michigan, because you had to not only align the desire of the utility to take the tax credit, but to have the pressure of the state government, in that case Michigan, was pushing toward a competitive market. And so that formed a company now called ITC, is the founder company of that. So that is there, but it generally requires something to kind of jump started. The only other point I was going to make was, kind of in the concept of think globally, act locally, and Connaughton got on that pretty well, but it really is the nitty gritty of a competitor trying to get in, that underbrush that you want to clear, even more than incentives and stuff. Quite frankly, the incentives of getting in the market are usually there if the market's open, but there are so many little obstacles. And this is that little underbrush that while you're looking at the horizon, you're stumbling over roots on the ground, things in the interconnection process, the timelines, the cost, the engineering studies. Even in the cases of Texas, we had homeowners associations that prohibited the ability to put solar panels on your own roof. In the state where private property is king, you still have those little intermediate monopolists that come along and try to tell you what to do, whether that's a socialist local government or something else. So, I think those little detail issues I'm a nerd, but it is real important for everybody to realize that big policies matter, but those little baby steps are at the end of the day what opens the market.
This is Jim. Let me add one final thought as we close this out, because Pat's dead right. There is one major catalyst available that has not been tried yet, and that's to bring the lawsuit under the U.S. Constitution declaring the electricity grid unconstitutional in its current makeup, which is available to us now because the grid is now interconnected. And now that it's interconnected and electrons are freely flowing, there is a clear case to be made that you cannot sustain the vertically integrated monopoly anymore. So it's one lawsuit. It's actually one plaintiff, and it's 3 years to the Supreme Court. But that would upend the whole system and create this catalyst that everyone's been talking about. No different than the breakup of AT&T. No different than deregulation of airlines. No different than the deregulation of trains. No different than the deregulation of milk. All of these things occurred with targeted lawsuit, busting open the monopoly, and then public policy fills in. All the rules get rewritten, everything gets reoriented. That would probably be the single most effective, and in my view, the fastest way to break open the innovation engine across the country.
Jim, I love it. And I got to say that the original version of that strategy was pioneered by none other than Cornelius Vanderbilt, one of the first tycoons in this country, when he broke open the New York ferry boat market with a federal lawsuit that really established the Interstate Commerce Clause and its power, the federal government to be in charge of interstate competition and make sure that states did not interfere. So I call it, what you're doing, the Cornelius Vanderbilt strategy, and I love it. So now we're going to go take a little break, but again, during the break, you guys can leave if you need to for to break, but because Wayne Weingarten was not able to be there for the brainstorming session, I want him to be able to explain the co-victory bond and loan idea, which is very significant because most clean energy guys have always argued for policies that target the clean energy and maybe benefit the economy. The co-victory bond and loan idea is a COVID recession recovery idea for the entire economy, but one that does not leave clean energy behind, and is also, especially because it targets financial leverage in the capital markets, it's especially useful for clean energy. It basically strengthens the argument that we've been making that basic free market policies will accelerate clean energy faster than others because clean energy is now becoming more competitive. So Wayne, could you explain this proposal, co-victory bonds and loans, and where it came from?
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me? Brad, can you hear me?
Yes, Wayne is a senior fellow, I should say, for the Pacific Research Institute. He writes for Forbes, and he's been advising us on clean tax cut ideas and clean free market policy since 2015. So he's been up to his neck in this stuff. Go ahead.
A long time. I apologize for coming late, everyone. The code, I can't take credit for the idea. The idea's credit really goes to Rod. But the idea, which is off of what we've been working on in terms of tax-free bonds with respect to new green technology, and the idea being there's two types of incentives, right? We can have positive incentives or negative incentives. And we want to encourage an activity, like we want to encourage innovations in green technology, you want a positive incentive. Well, one way to get a positive incentive is to reduce the negative incentive that are taxes. That's the basic construct. And Rod's been helping me work that in so many different ways. With respect to the co-victory bonds and loans, this is really taking the concept and trying to get proof of that concept with respect to our current economic downturn. What we're facing in this downturn, I think this is something everyone's aware of, obviously. We need to help employees and businesses bridge this shutdown of the economy that the virus has created. And so what is necessary is liquidity. On top of that, once we start getting the economy moving again, we need to rebuild capital. We need to get all sorts of resources into play. And so taxes are inevitably a negative incentive against all of that. So what our idea is, with respect to all debt issued, whether it's a bond through the capital markets or a loan through a bank, it would be issued tax-free. So you would, in effect, depending on how it was issued, reduce either the corporate income tax with respect to the bank that they're issuing it, or the capital gains or the income tax on the bonds that were issued to the capital markets. That is about a 30% reduction in your interest costs. So even at today's low interest rates, you're going to actually materially reduce the cost of capital for firms. Now, what's really innovative about this is that this is not simply for firms that exist. Because it's going through the private sector, we're offering this benefit to all sorts of new firms, new innovation. And in particular, if you talk about the green technology, the new innovations, all of those types of ideas, all of these programs are now going to be open to a co-victory bond and loan program, because you're now evaluating each program based on its merits. And so we believe this is an innovative way to, in effect, to be positive, feed two birds with one piece of bread, where we can actually help the economy recover at the same time that we can incent innovation in the green technology space. I think that's an overview. I don't know if there's anyone wants to dive deeper into any of these specific issues with it.
You know, I think let's. Am I on? I'm unmuted. Good. So Wayne, I think that was a great exposition of the idea. You know, one of the things that you know, I want to point out is Steve Nadell did a little bit of a cost analysis of this. If we issue these co-victory bonds and loans, 5-year terms, we have a 2-year period in which they can be issued while the economy is recovering from this recession. If we issued $1 trillion of this debt, it would cost 30 to 40 billion dollars. And that means that co-victory bonds and loans are a potential way we could bridge the gap between Donald Trump's budget figure of 750 billion and Nancy Pelosi's figure of 2.2 trillion for a CARES package, because you could give an awful lot of aid for very, very cost effectively. You could give $1 trillion of basically investment stimulus for a cost of 40 billion. That would be quite something for the economy, and a way to maybe bridge the gap on some of this stuff.
And something to emphasize on that, which I think is very important, is that it's not simply the amount you spend, it's how you spend it. And so this would be a much more efficient way of spending that money in a much more meaningful pro-growth way.
Right. And the other thing I want to point out is that this is absolutely, it's not targeted at clean technologies. It's really for everybody, but it really will benefit, you know, move our economy in a clean direction. And it would probably be even more beneficial if you, you know, had that kind of international tax reciprocity attached to it. That would be complicated to figure it out, but they would make an even bigger capital market, and it would be the kind of free market streamlining that we need globally to help the world recover from this recession. Anyway, food for thought, and it does help competition, but we need to move on to our next session. I hope you had a good break. It was a very busy break, but I think that I will now turn to my co-host, the brilliant Julian Morris from the Reason Foundation, to help introduce the next session on free trade and clean free trade, post-World War II lessons, anti-competitive market distortions, and the agreement on climate change, trade, and sustainability. And let me just say, before turning to Julian, you know, the post-World War II lesson I'll give you in about 1 minute, and that is my observation that the most successful turn to free trade in the 20th century occurred after World War II. During the Depression, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, you know, from the United States, you know, were a precipitating factor that triggered a global trade war, and international trade plummeted. And that is a factor that probably was one of the contributing factors that made the Great Depression great. Post-World War II, with many of the European powers flat on their back, particularly Germany, those economies really were desperate for help. And the United States offered a package that included the Marshall Plan grants. Now, I'm not a fan, let me make clear, of state-to-state foreign aid. However, but these were part of a package that were conditioned on countries dropping their trade barriers, dropping their tariffs, and starting to enter into a process of creating open markets between countries. So I bring this up because just like the example of the IMF, you know, and the need for financing in Honduras leading to, you know, competitive energy markets, and incentive helped create the biggest liberalization of trade in the 20th century. So incentives matter, and we can probably do something much better than state-to-state foreign aid or, you know, IMF carrots. We can probably design something better than that. What that will be exactly, I'm not exactly sure, and maybe you folks can help me figure out. But as we go into our trade discussion, you know, maybe we can think about incentives as we consider clean free trade and anti-competitive market distortions. Julian, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Rod, for that introduction, which actually sort of eliminated the first sentence of what I was going to mention. So, I mean, as Rod indicated, you know, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was a key driver for reducing, especially tariffs in trade between nations, to the point where now the main barriers to trade are not really tariffs. Yes, they in some cases are still a problem, but the main barriers now are what Shankar Singham has called anti-competitive market distortions. And rather than try and define those myself, I think I'll let Shankar do that. I'll briefly introduce Shankar, who is, I think, one of the world's leading experts on both the law and the economics of trade. He worked as a practicing trade lawyer at Steele Hector Davis in the US for many years, and then returned to his home in the UK, where he worked at the Gardner Institute in London, then subsequently at the Institute of Economic Affairs. And he's now, in addition to his other affiliations, a leading advisor to the UK government, very, very deeply in the weeds on matters relating to trade and other things. And it's a really great honor to have Shankar here to talk to us, giving his perspective and might also give some indications of where the UK might go. But if you could begin, Shankar, by just quickly sort of outlining what an anti-competitive market distortion is, and then maybe give some indication as to how it might be possible going forwards to reduce those distortions through bilateral or multilateral agreements, that would be great. Do we have Shankar?
Yes, sure. Thanks very much, Julian. And it's good to be on with all of you. What I'd say, just to build on what Rod was saying and what Julian sort of spoke about, we had a long history after the Second World War of systematic reduction in tariffs, dealing with some, and then eventually through the 70s and 80s, and particularly with the Uruguay round, dealing with some other issues that relate to border distortions and border barriers. But there was a gap, and the gap was essentially what happens behind the border, and particularly regulations and other activities of government that distort markets in anti-competitive ways. So while we do have some in the WTO disciplines on domestic regulation in the context of sanitary and phytosanitary rules and technical barriers to trade to some extent, these are usually based more on the well understood and defined WTO principles of most favored nation, national treatment, and non-discrimination, but they aren't really focused on conditions of competition. Although I will say that some decisions that the WTO panels and appellate body have come down with, particularly in the area of domestic taxation, which is discriminatory, does get at the issue of have you changed the equality of competitive opportunity for certain types of products. So there is a gap here. In the Singapore round in 1997, the members of the WTO did come together and try to plug this gap. They tried to develop sort of a set of disciplines on what I've called anti-competitive market distortions. But we've not been very successful in taking this forward. Most recently, some 20 plus years on, the Japanese, the US, and the EU have put together a group on eliminating market distortions. Obviously, this is aimed, at China more than anything else, but to eliminate distortions that damage the competitive playing field. So, with respect to how this applies to this particular sector, I think if your goal is to have a more competitive market and a larger market for any product, but particularly for these kinds of products, tackling anti-competitive market distortions is going to be a key aspect of trade agreements going forward. So what is an anti-competitive market distortion? It is any government regulation, practice, or activity that distorts, or to use antitrust language, significantly lessens competition in a relevant product or geographic market. What are the remedies that we can suggest? Because it's all very well to put in disciplines in trade agreements to deal with other countries' market distortions, but an offensive-only agenda will not achieve very much. So you need some defensive measures as well. And the defensive measure that has been suggested is, and to do it in a WTO compliant way, but to consider, as opposed to the Trump administration approach on China, which is a big tariff that's not really related to the size of the Chinese distortion, is actually to have a tarification, as it were, of the distortion that is actually linked to the scale of the distortion, which gives the country that's doing the distorting an incentive to lower its distortion. It has a choice. You maintain the distortion and continue to pay for it, or lower the distortion, and then the tarification goes away. But it isn't going to be easy. This is not like a trade remedy action. It's not like an anti-dumping countervailing duty action where it's very easy to bring a case, and once a case has been brought, it's almost impossible to get rid of the tariff. In this case, the parties would have to demonstrate that there is a distortion, demonstrate that it has an anti-competitive effect, which is not going to be easy to do. And they will also have to demonstrate causation and damage. And those things are not necessarily that easy to do either. So those are the kinds of things that you would bring in to this. Offensively, you would want to make sure that countries that are distorting markets in ways that either in favor of incumbent technology companies, incumbent producers, which often obviously occurs, or they're doing it in other ways to use subsidies or other means, or even distortions by artificially inflating the carbon floor price or the cost of producing energy in different ways. That these are all types of distortion, and they are anti-competitive if they actually can be demonstrated to have a negative effect on competition. So there's that aspect of it, and the other aspect of it is obviously free trade, and is obviously the idea of lowering tariff barriers on products that are environmental goods, and that's an agenda that is a lot easier to push forward. Fewer people will object to lowering tariffs on environmental goods. But that's also one part of ensuring. What's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is to have a pro-competitive market that is of sufficient size that it can deliver better prices, more choice, all of these things that competitive markets do around the world. And certainly this is something that and the final thing I'll say on this before we get into a discussion is the UK government certainly is aware of these kinds of issues, and the advantage of the UK on these issues is it's obviously very rare to have a major G7 economy that's sort of embarking on independent trade policy for the first time in 50 years. Probably will never see this again. It's an opportunity, and what I've said to other countries is that the way you should look at the UK's process here is precisely that. It's a major G7 that's adopted trade policy, and a lot of things that have been very difficult to push in the global context or in the WTO context. You may have a willing partner that's willing here to try new things, to adapt to new ideas. And push this forward. Now, on the other hand, the negative side of this is that it's not entirely clear at this point which side of the table the UK will actually land on. We're having a vigorous debate in the UK in the agricultural context about whether the UK is going to adopt essentially and retain European agricultural regulation. Which has put the EU, on the other side of most countries in the WTO. Is the UK going to be a sort of mini version of the EU, or is it actually going to be doing something different and more trade liberalizing and more consistent with its WTO obligations in that area? So, and of course, in the environmental area, we have COP21 coming. There is a very, as you all know, there is a very powerful environmental movement in the UK. So I think you will see in the UK, aside from the trade policy agenda, some drive and move from certain UK government entities, particularly DEFRA, but particularly the Department for the Environment and Food and Rural Affairs. They will be moving to perhaps do some unilateral things in the environmental space, perhaps look at things like border tax adjustments and so forth. And in the context of the overall WTO framework on those sorts of things, particularly the TBT agreement, coming up with reasonable, viable alternatives to these proposed unilateral mechanisms will be really important. So any ideas that you as a group have on what those reasonable alternatives are that help you nevertheless achieve your goal, you achieve your legitimate environmental objective, those will be really, really important. And if they're available and they're ignored, that could ground a WTO violation, because the country doing it will not be able to then rely on the exemptions that exist in the WTO GATT framework for things like protecting human and plant health, or, for example, protecting natural resources and that type of thing. So the idea of the distortion mechanism is both a sword and a shield to ensure a competitive market. So I'll stop there, and happy to have a discussion about this.
Thanks very much, Shankar. I mean, I think right now we're going to try and move on with a couple of other inputs to the conversation from other esteemed participants. And I'll start actually with Ronald Steenbleck, who is at ISD, if Ronald's on the call, who is an expert in environment and trade, and has been deeply involved in the ACCTS, which is an agreement among a number of nations to seek to reduce barriers to trade in environmental goods and services, and reduce, for example, subsidies to fossil fuels. So maybe, Ron, you could quickly take us through the ACCTS, and in the context of these impediments to trade, maybe describe how the ACCTS will function, and especially its relationship to the WTO, for example, and compliance with rules there.
Thank you very much, Julian. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep. And thanks to Rod and Hallie and everybody else for the opportunity to speak here. Just to give me an idea how many minutes you want me to speak, I wasn't told that.
I mean, if you could do it in 5, that would be great.
Okay, I'll try to. All right. So just to a little bit of background, there have been attempts to liberalize trade in environmental goods and services going way back, and you may be familiar with Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. That forum tried in the late 1990s to come up with a list of environmental goods and fast track elimination of tariffs on that. They couldn't get agreement. And so they went to the WTO, and there were other countries interested, and so the WTO said, okay, we'll do this. And they combined it with also environmental services, but that was what's called the Doha round. That failed. And then finally, in the early part of this past decade, the APEC members came back to it and said, okay, we'll develop a shorter list, and we'll agree to set 5% ad valorem tariff maximum on the goods. But meanwhile, then after that, there was another attempt at what's called a plurilateral negotiation for something called an environmental goods agreement, and that involved China, the United States, the EU, Canada, Japan, most of the big players, and it got very, very close, and there was a long list of almost 300 goods, but that failed, and it fell over bicycles. Well, that precipitated it. Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of protectionist interest against bicycles, unfortunately. So, right here, it's uncontroversial. It's still controversial. But so then what was really interesting, and I was involved in some of the early discussions on this, was that New Zealand in particular, working with other countries that it's worked on in other forums to promote climate-friendly and trade policies, we decided that maybe instead of taking a kind of a top-down approach of really involving all of the major countries first, what in the old days they used to call the Quad, and we would say the Quad plus China, that maybe the best approach would be to get some small countries, like-minded countries together, and start small and then build out. In a sense, that's what the TPP did. that started with an agreement between New Zealand and Singapore, and then expanded out. Unfortunately, the United States backed out, just at the point where they could have been the leader in this. But that's a whole other story. So it started out with a proposal last September involving Costa Rica, Fiji, Iceland, New Zealand, and Norway, and in January or February, Switzerland joined it. So they have 4 areas that they're negotiating: eliminating tariffs on environmental goods, making binding commitments on trade and environmental services, creating new disciplines to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, and then a little bit more wonky one, develop guidelines for voluntary eco-labeling programs and associated mechanisms. That's a special concern for New Zealand because they've been hit by things like food mile labeling. So they were supposed to start the negotiations in February, but thanks to COVID, they get delayed. They have the first negotiations in June, and I believe that they're at the moment having the second negotiations, at least on the fossil fuel subsidies part of it, which is what I'm following the most closely at the moment. The idea is to get some kinds of agreements on all of these 4 areas, and then reopen it to other countries to join. My understanding, I'm not 100% sure on this, is that the UK may be participating, or maybe may have sent somebody as an observer to the negotiations, but the actual formal members are still just this 6. Once they start, they want to get something concrete and not end up with expanding it too much and then not having an agreement at the end. They'll probably build on the lists that were done for the environmental goods agreement, lists of environmental goods. For environmental services, it'll probably be some kind of agreement to make binding commitments on most favored nation, national treatment agreements, and a few other things like that, at least initially. On subsidies, it's probably the most difficult one. Only 2 of the countries, Norway and New Zealand, are significant producers of fossil fuels, relative to their economies. The other ones may have some small tax exemptions or other kinds of support for fossil fuels, but it's really a New Zealand, Norway thing. So that's probably used up in my 5 minutes, but anyway, the idea is eventually to try to get more and more countries interested, and the countries that I think will be the most easy to bring on, particularly for environmental goods and fossil fuels, is small island nations, which are also, of course, the nations that are most vulnerable to rising seas and climate change, and that's in hurricanes and other effects of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronald. That's really helpful. Gives some great context. I think if Roberto Salinas is here, he mentioned a kind of neat idea that he's been working on. Roberto, I see you. That looks at creating a sort of free trade area on the Mexico-US border. Roberto, so just quick background, Roberto's a leading free market advocate in Mexico, been involved in kind of free market advocacy for many years, and now runs the Atlas Foundation's Latin American initiative. That's the right term, but anyway, Roberto, you could explain yourself if you want. Otherwise, just maybe you could explain your proposal.
Yes, thank you, Julian. It's wonderful to be part of this extremely interesting and educational conversation. It's not a topic that I'm terribly familiar with, except from the policy vantage point. And as Julian was saying, I have the opportunity now with Atlas Network to be part of the Center for Latin America. Another colleague of ours is here today. Gonzalo Schwartz has also been very involved, and of course Guillermo Peña Panting, whom we heard from him earlier is also a very important driver of the different ideas that we try and propose. So part of the whole nature of focusing on free market policies, open market policies for clean energies is in part to try and seize the narrative, or rather place the narrative concerning renewable energies and clean energies in a different light. Why? Because so far it is the, let us say, the statist point of view that has seized this narrative and has taken this flag as its own, with our own equivalents of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal and whatnot. So I think this is a marvelous opportunity as far as the optics are concerned to change the narrative and change the debates and introduce some real honest to goodness investment, private investment or productive investment driven policies to that effect. Now, what I think is extremely interesting to note is part of the change in mentality and in outlook that has occurred as a result of full-scale trade and investment integration between two countries that over 25 years ago, it was thought this was impossible. Mexico, the United States, and Canada were the three countries in the context of the North American Free Trade Agreement, and now rebranded USMCA. Back then, in the early 90s, it was thought it's impossible for trade at such scale. Even Paul Craig Roberts, a pro-free market advocate, would say this is not going to work because of the enormous asymmetries, economic asymmetries that exist between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Yet the facts tell us something very different. And part of what has occurred is that Mexico has gone from a commodity-based country into a manufacturing, a very large manufacturing sector. A lot of these facts aren't known. But my point is that as a result of this paradigm shift in economics driven by free trade and driven by a free trade agreement negotiated by the three parts, the number one driver of competitiveness today is seen as affordable and reliable energy. And this has produced a whole euphoria concerning the possibilities of investment in solar energies and in aeolic energies, to the extent that a group, I wasn't involved in the group, I've promoted it, but I wasn't involved in the original research, but a group of engineers spearheaded originally by Luciano Castillo at Purdue University. I happen to be a graduate of Purdue, so I'm doubly proud of that fact. Put together a proposal that instead of focusing on a wall between the United States and Mexico, why not focus on an investment-driven region that is conformed of solar and wind farms throughout the entire border, and that is completely private investment driven. Not 1 cent, not even the need for any specific tax policy to spur this type of investment. And this, I think, is the type of out-of-the-box initiatives that would come a very long way, first, to capture the narrative of clean energies on our side, and second, to lend credence and credibility to the idea of how such trade agreements can spur the investment conditions, create the investment conditions for something as far-reaching as imagining such an important border zone between Mexico and the United States, to encompass a whole clean energy field that can not only generate jobs, that can not only generate investment, that can also secondarily address security concerns, because of course it's going to be, it's a private investment. It's private investment that is financing these different projects, but also create exactly what the very large manufacturing expansion across the border requires, which is access to long-term, affordable and reliable energy inputs. Today, there's an onslaught in Mexico, given our new populist government headed by Manuel López Obrador, to turn back and go back to the 1970s, the 1980s, the idea of electricity sovereignty, of energy sovereignty. And I think that our president in Mexico and many of his many of his advisors have not realized that he's locked in at a regional level with a trade agreement to rather try and start thinking about how to spur investment rather than remonopolize the electricity and the energy markets. So I think it's something very much that we should very much look forward to. What I will do, Julian and Rod, what I will do is I will paste the link of the original article where I found this, and I've written a great deal about it. But I think it's this type of out-of-the-box thinking that can go a long way to give credibility and to give substance to clean capitalism.
Roberto, if I may weigh in, Julian. Roberto, thank you very much. We're really, really honored to have Atlas Network here. I have to say, Smith Richardson Foundation was one of the founding donors that helped Atlas get started way back when in the 1980s. So we're very pleased to have you in here. And I really want everybody to understand, that Atlas is a tremendous organization that links together over 500 free market think tanks around the world. So if we come up with good ideas that have international applications, this is a network where you can gain, 500, voices, or well, at least some those that are interested, can help promote these ideas around the world.
Yes.
So this is a very powerful network that Roberto is representing here today, and I'm very pleased to have such genuine free market thinkers at the table, who have been missing in previous climate and environmental discussions too often. But I must say that we're running a little bit behind, and what we're going to do because of that is that we will go a little bit longer, just to be flexible. We're going to be a little bit outside the box. So if people cannot, if some of the key participants can't stay on longer than 4, let me know, and we will put you in advance of the agenda, if possible. But the next segment also deals with international free trade and with exploring new global strategies to clean open markets. I wanted to give, and if people have to sign off at 4 o'clock, I understand, but maybe we, to respect the conversation, we'll stay on as long as we can. But I did want to, Julian, with your permission, I'd like to give our fellow co-host, Charles Hernick, an opportunity to say a few words about an idea that they've been working on. And I believe that this is very, very important. And I will, and I think Charles knows why I think it's important. So I'll let him speak for me and weigh in if I need to. But, Charles, please tell us what you've been working on.
Sure. Thanks, Rod. I appreciate the attention here and the numerous participants from around the U.S. And I know that we have some global attendance here too. So thank you for that. And Rod, I'll try to be succinct, but I think that the key message that is coming across in what I've been listening to, a lot of folks interested in expanding market competition, expanding trade, and really tackling in a meaningful way the clean energy transition and climate crisis that we know we need to get busy and handle. For that reason, Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, my organization, has been the champion of an idea that would help provide, in a limited government way, help provide more visibility and reduce barriers for folks to engage in carbon markets and specifically in offsets. I think that there's been robust efforts in all sorts of different directions to reduce emissions from smokestacks, from tailpipes, from all different emission sources. But we know that if we're going to reduce emissions in a meaningful way globally, we also need to focus on the offsets. And if we can do that in a way that is low cost, we will be able to, and provides high information and assurance to whoever's buying the offset, we'll have done a good thing. So CRESS has worked with a handful of senators and representatives in what we've seen introduced as a bipartisan, bicameral climate bill. So I should repeat that, bipartisan, both houses of Congress, climate bill called the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which focuses on empowering farmers, land managers, in terms of foresters and ranchers to be able to develop carbon offset credits on their land and sell them on a voluntary basis to corporations or individuals who want to reduce their emissions and lessen their carbon footprint. We know the math works. We've got a smart group of people here. I don't need to dive into the details of how carbon offsets work and why they're necessary. But you see that there is surging demand for zero emissions or low emissions sources and options like offsets. Every day, if you open up the Wall Street Journal or whatever newspaper you're reading, there's another company that's focused on getting to net zero over the course of the next 2 decades. There are other states and municipalities, religious institutions, universities, you name it, folks are aiming to reduce their emissions. Purchasing carbon offsets will be a major part of how they do it. It's written into almost every plan. And what we want to be able to do is assure that America's farmers and ranchers can participate in this market. Right now, they're responsible for about 10% of US emissions. But if we provide a mechanism where they can get paid to reduce their emissions, they can diversify their income. It will help the family farm. It will help local forestry operations be good for generating local revenue and income, and make it so that mandates and caps don't affect that particular industry. So that's a smaller subset of a broader idea that CRESS works on called a voluntary framework that would help do the same thing for other sectors, but basically provide more information and accountability and transparency into these voluntary commitments and really allow the power of markets to help guide emissions downward. So that's really what I wanted to share with you all. And thanks, Rod, for making a few minutes here. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Rod, or expand on an angle that you wanted to make sure that I covered.
Well, let me just say that one of the things that I find really intriguing about your effort is that this is not a mandated carbon market. This is a voluntary carbon market, which is a different thing. It's not imposing a tax on people, a hidden tax. These are corporations that have decided they want to lower their emissions and are going to, do carbon market trading to get there. And these are farmers who want to take advantage of that. So it makes all the sense in the world. What I really particularly like about this also is that, paradigms like clean tax cuts really work when you have sectors where you have well-defined metrics that are well understood and agreed upon. What you're developing here with the Growing Climate Solutions Act is a set of standards so that you could use clean tax cuts in agriculture once you have those metrics developed. So what you're doing is going to open up new policy opportunities. And further than that, I think you're going to open up cross-border policy opportunities. For instance, what if Canada joined in the Growing Climate Solutions Act and you were able to trade offsets? What if you were able to use these voluntary offsets, as a carrot for international free trade and competition? As an incentive to encourage countries to move to more of a private property rights framework in the rainforest, for instance, where that is desperately needed for conservation. So I think that this is I think that there's a couple of steps to go with this concept, but I think that it leads in a very interesting direction. Now, we're running short on time, as I said, and we're going to extend things, but I did ask to see if any of our panelists have to go, and Jim Connaughton will have to go in 9 minutes. So, and then we're going to continue the conversation that we're running behind on with Julian in the lead. But Jim, do you have any thoughts on what you've heard about ways to, new global strategies for clean open markets? What what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to focus on two things. One is new and old, and the other is not something we've discussed yet. It is a fact that what's been going on internationally around this subject is there's been a proxy war that's being fought due to the inability of the international participants to just agree on a binding target for greenhouse gases. So in the absence of an internationally enforceable agreement with a binding target for greenhouse gases, like we have for everything else, like ozone depleting substances, everything's a proxy war, which is why we're getting all these distortions. So I have a very particular thesis at the international level, and it's certainly true at the US level, that if you only focused on an internationally enforceable binding target, if we said, what is our emissions target, all this other stuff is going to get resolved a lot faster. But in the absence of that, it's proxy war for the end of time. So I just want to make that point. In America, for example, and this is a key example, the US government in 2007, bipartisan agreed to a lighting efficiency standard, 70% in 10 years. It ended up becoming disfavored by the right, and they cut off all the budget for it. But because it was enacted into US law, in the absence of any government dollars and any government regulatory program, we got 100% compliance ahead of time with net addition to consumer welfare, well documented by ACEEE. Look at their report on this, because it was a law, And so there was no implementing mechanisms, and the whole market went crazy and wildly successful, which also meant that the rest of the world is now getting LEDs ubiquitously deployed with no regulation in the rest of the world. Because we drove the price down, put the supply chain up, the market was big enough to do that. And so just something simple and clever was wildly successful and globally valuable. So that's at the top line. So all it takes is one major market to just do that and do it for real, and everything falls into place. Below the top line, highly disaggregated, is the world of international standards. So an exception to discrimination under the World Trade Organization is international standards. So if you get the international community to come together with consensus on technical standards, those are respected under the WTO if those are then enacted into national regulation law or other activities. So this is a bottom-up way to create a roadmap for advancing new energies, new technologies, new services. And I'll give the example I will give there is eco-labeling standards. So ISO created eco-labeling standards, and those ended up getting adopted into national law. And now we're working on a new set. I think Ronald was really, what he's talking about is very interesting. But that is a way to accelerate and expand very bottom up, driven by the market participants to create these standards. One closing point on this, in the US, there's a law called the National Technology Transfer and Advancement Act, 1996, which provides that if there is a consensus international standard on any topic, it's actually not limited,
Consensus national standard.
shall be used. What's that?
It's a consensus national standard.
What's that?
It's a consensus national standard.
No, the consensus international standard, actually, in the NTAA. Yeah, if there's a standard on this consensus standard, I'm sorry, Julian, to get a consensus international gets adopted as an ANSI standard. You are correct. Yeah, but in any event, under that act, it shall be used in regulation, or it shall be used and referred to in the context of government procurement. It's wildly underutilized in this space, but it's a way you can drive markets, but with consensus and with technical input and economic awareness and other things that are currently lacking in sort of the negotiated, legislated, or treaty environment. So it has all the characteristics of having to have real market saliency. So I give you those two ideas, and I regret that I must sign off, but really enjoyed participating in this with all of you.
Thank you so much, Jim. That's really, really helpful insights. Actually, I love the idea of international standards for various reasons. Actually, one would be, and I'd love comments from Ronald and from Shankar and anybody else who wants to chime in on the importance, the potential importance of standards that would have to be there to underpin any international agreement that seeks to address reductions in carbon emissions or other environmental criteria as a condition for reducing barriers to trade. I mean, it seems like ACCTS is going to have to do that. It's going to have to adopt some kind of standards. You've talked about the list of goods, which is more sort of technologically specific, but is it possible to go abstract away from that and just develop standards that could be applied to any technology that sort of conforms and thereby would be able to benefit from these reductions in barriers?
You know, Julian, we have one participant that is going to need to go and can't stay on. So let you know, Bruce, how long can you stay with us? Bruce Laurie?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rod. Yeah, I can stay for a few more minutes. I'm supposed to be on a call at 4, so I should probably not be too late for that.
Well,
but,
okay, maybe Bruce, you could give us a few insights from your perspective on you know, what's happening in Canada.
Just a second, we will have Bruce do that. Bruce, please, you know, give us your reflections on these ideas that you've heard today from the Canadian perspective, and tell us what's on your mind regarding these.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rod. Thanks so much for having me today. You know, I think where we're going right now in Canada is, you know, after we had something called the throne speech yesterday, which really outlined quite an aggressive plan for the country to invest in clean energy and renewables, clean tech. We're looking at some interesting investments in hydrogen, etc. But so we're generally optimistic, maybe a little bit less free market than many of your participants would be looking for. But I think what we're doing, and our approach here, is really to figure out, you know, what are the right tools for the job given the circumstances. And the one project maybe that I'll just touch on, which is it's not yet kind of a public initiative, but we've just undertaken a detailed assessment of the opportunities for decarbonization of the power system in northeastern North America. And this is an area that's quite extensive, you know, including all of New England, New York, Ontario, Quebec, and the eastern Canadian provinces. And so a very large population, large power grids, quite a different mix. And what's really interesting, what came out of that work is the recognition that we really need to do two things in combination. We need to increase the investment in the grid interties and the transmission interconnections throughout the region. And then we really need to look at how we can shift the market rules to allow for, you know, greater competition and access. And of course, you know, throughout the world, and as we've seen today in the conversations, you know, we can see just in the microcosm of the different states and provinces, you know, dramatically different market structures, different market rules, but at the end of the day, all very parochial and driven by the politics of the region. And so we really need to start to break through some of that kind of, you know, parochial political control in the power system across the regions. But one thing that came out, and this was again research done with leading utility experts across all of those regions, was the idea that if we start investing in some of this transmission interconnect capability, that we might actually, you know, be able to shift some of the market rules once that capacity is built. So the idea that each of these networks has been built kind of with their own service kind of service areas in mind, there isn't a lot of incentive to change the rules for the free flow of electricity across the jurisdiction. So that was kind of a finding that surprised me a little bit in the study. And then the idea then, of course, is that once we, and this is where a lot of the politics comes in as well, you know, we've got a utility like Hydro-Quebec that has massive hydroelectric resources, significant supply of you know, carbon-free electricity. but often it can't get to markets like New York City because it gets blocked by, states like Maine and Vermont that don't want the power lines running through their states. So, so by creating what we're proposing is a regional planning process that starts getting people in a room together to understand the broader benefits in terms of decarbonizing, greater benefits to consumers, greater reliability. But that's only going to work if we have a greater flow and access and competition for the electric resources in the region. And so that's anyway. We're looking. It's still early days. We just received the study, but with something that we're looking forward to advancing with my work at the Ivy Foundation, and we're really looking to get some support from some of our American Foundation colleagues. There seems to be tremendous support from the regions right now. So I'll leave it there, Rod. I just wanted to give that quick snapshot.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
That's
Bruce.
quite a lot of material. We'd love to follow up with you.
Thank you very
on
much.
that.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We always appreciate your input and your commitment to competition.
Yeah, great. I have competition for another meeting now.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Allie, please, for our EarthX audience, let them know what you think.
Thanks very much. We appreciate everyone being here, offering their insights. It's been terrific. I've been updating the website. I hope everyone has a chance to look at that, trying to get everything, and we'll review the chat afterwards. The next steps, which we'll talk about, are the Charrette summary will be written and posted on the website, and we'll have some video highlights to be posted after we've had a chance to edit it. We appreciate, again, EarthX TV live streaming the event, and we believe it will be available for replay. Follow-up charrettes on these single topics will be scheduled. We appreciate everyone coming in and paying attention to their emails so that they can know when those are happening. Spread the word by sharing on LinkedIn and email, and contact us directly. We want to work with you. These are complex issues and we need all of your help. Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead, please, Jeff.
Hi, sorry, I'm in the process of spreading milkweed seeds, so we have habitat for monarch butterflies next year. I was very interested in the legislation that's being proposed on creating an agriculture market, and I'd like to speak directly with the person who was discussing that, because we're developing a pilot project in New York State, and I would love to see if we can do some interconnect.
Great, I'll put you in touch with him. That's Charles Hernick at the Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions.
Great, thank you.
Great. Julian, we can keep this conversation going for as long as the participants want. And, I think it would be a great idea to focus on, we have a number of people who were in this conversation. Is Guillermo still in the conversation with us?
I am. I'm here.
Great. I mean, I think it would be great to reflect on some of the suggestions and proposals that have been raised, and what can be done with international action to help countries like Honduras and people like Guillermo, who are trying to expand competition in their market. We know that international incentives played a role in encouraging Honduras to open up their energy market. What would be better? What would be better than an IMF deal? How do we get to policies that support open markets in energy markets throughout the world?
Can I just add a bit of context, which is, I mean, I think, Rod, you opened with some observations about the fact that, next year, the COP26 of the Framework Convention on Climate Change is going to be held in the UK. And I think you have this sort of interesting intersect of policies coming into that, where the UK last year passed a binding legislation to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The EU in March this year created binding legislation, creating the same binding legislation. Joe Biden has made a commitment to net zero by 2050, part of his platform. So, you know, I think there is at least a possibility, some might see it as a threat, that there will be a push to achieve binding targets of you know, net zero carbon among some group of nations by 2050. China just a few days ago committed to net zero by 2060. So there's going to be, I think, a push for binding targets. I think a question arises as to whether that is actually the right thing to do, whether it's the best way forward. I think an argument could be made that rather than binding targets, it would be better to have international standards on certain goods and services that would result in improvements in the likelihood of innovations taking place that lead to reductions in emissions, not necessarily net zero by some specific date, but probably net zero in the not too distant future. I mean, I think that's at least a conversation to be had. I think trying to do the technology forcing to achieve net zero globally by 2060 and in some countries by 2050 is worrying. I mean, the UK Treasury estimated that it was going to cost £1 trillion by 2050, and actually even the Climate Change Committee estimated it was going to be somewhere in the region of 600 billion. So it's really not an order of magnitude difference between them, but a huge cost for in either way. And other nations it would be more costly because the UK already is actually very efficient. I'm sure in the US it would be more costly per capita to do that. So anyway, so that's sort of, I would be interested in whether there could be a conversation about what we could do collaboratively going forward to advance a more bottom-up approach to that issue. We don't need to make any concrete decisions today, but just sort of throwing it out there, because I think we've heard a number of ideas today that could form sort of the basis of part of this anyway. And then over to Guillermo. Sorry, that was just my interjection, but you know.
No, well, I'm interested in listening more. I think the case here with the IMF was one short case that helped us out, but I think there's a lot more. You know, Central America already has an energy interconnectivity agreement. There's a regional standard for the quality the quality and safety of the network. But I would like to say, taking advantage of this opportunity, that a lot of what was done in the legislation 6 years ago for opening the energy market, a good part of that came through conversations with Shankar Singh while we were talking about other issues. So just a shout out and hi Shankar, how are you doing? And the work, those conversations, you can see that are still moving along today. I'm more on my side. I'm more interested in seeing what other ideas would show up regarding these type of agreements, of international agreements. Would it be, what about, are there agreements through, nation to nation that are, or I guess state to state that are non-contiguous states? Is there anything that we could do down that path? Just general questions. I don't really have answers for.
Okay. Anybody else want to contribute to the conversation, or I'd like to. Shankar and Ron want to come back with their thoughts on where we might move forward.
I would like to ask Shankar a question if he's still with us. Oh, great, good. Well, actually, sort of a double-barreled question, because there are, a couple of proposals that have been put on the table. I don't know if you heard them all. They're in the handouts that was given to you. There was the common commitments proposal. Did you have a chance to look at that in the straw proposals?
Not yet, but I can certainly look at that now.
I'm interested in your thoughts on that. The idea is, you know, to recap very briefly, is that one of the responsibilities of the UK as the host of COP26 is to raise the climate ambitions of all of these nations. And as Julian has just told us, he's not really terribly thrilled with this idea of raising commitments.
Yes.
You know, he thinks maybe standards might be better. You know, the common commitments idea says, well, you know, those commitments aren't necessarily so bad if they're accompanied by a qualification that those we're going to raise commitments, but only by free market means, by means that remove that open up markets and remove barriers to tax, trade, and anti-competitive barriers. And we're going to move towards climate policies. And this would enable nations to have more comfort, you know, adopting commitments. Those nations that are worried about the cost of these commitments, the cost of opening barriers and reducing barriers is a net economic positive for your economy. So is this, you know, this is a potential new approach to international commitments, which puts free market policies at the UN table, right? And then not just one chair, it gives us a whole bench of policies to choose from. So if the UK were to lead on the idea of you know, common commitments that are conditioned on these being free market, wouldn't that help the UK free trade agenda? You know, because it would suddenly, if you get more nations into that framework, you know, it says, you know, free trade is a way to, you know, to deliver environmentally beneficial results. What, you know, what do you think of that idea?
Well, I mean, I think just to pick that up and to pick up on some of the things that Julian was just talking about with respect to international standards. I mean, I think as a general rule, clearly international standards are a better approach from a global trading system standpoint than unilateral action by countries. And obviously, if you have an international standard or you're in imminent, you have an international standard that's imminent, then that gives you protection under any kind of attack on the WTO technical barriers to trade agreement. So that would be a better way of proceeding. I think with respect to these commitments, these common commitments, I think you could, I mean, I could envisage something where you had a commitment where there was some linkage to a suite of other issues, and so there could be linkage to things like, you know, we will not, and our partners will not continue to subsidize fossil fuels, if that's what's going on in certain places, a commitment to ensure that electricity markets are rendered more competitive, and the distortions that exist in electricity markets around the world are limited in some way. Some fairly hortatory language about how that might proceed. I mean, I think also linking to other international organizations that have an impact on some of those things, like, for example, obviously the obvious ones like the OECD and so on. But you could, just to think outside the box, you know, you could also link to organizations like the International Competition Network, which is the network of competition agencies around the world. And you could say something like, well, you know, you ought to be exercising, the national competition agencies all over the world, ought to be exercising your competition advocacy mandate to lower distortions in your own markets that are anti-competitive, including in energy markets, and eliminating regulatory barriers in energy markets that lead to higher cost and higher prices for energy. So yeah, I mean, I think you could link those common commitments to a suite of other things, but I would not see these as mutually exclusive with respect to trying to get an international standard in place for a particular product, you know, for product characteristics. I would want to try and do both, I think. But I think it's going to be important in the UK COP26 context to
So,
make
so
make
Shankar, and then maybe let me interject that maybe what the common commitments does is it says we're going to use free market means and standards, so that the
internationally agreed standards. Yeah,
right. So the commitment is conditioned on trying to get there using standards, using free market means, and just putting notice that these countries are not going to adopt anti-competitive policies and intense regulations to get there. They're going to try, but it's going to be a free market attempt.
And they're not going to distort their markets in ways
right.
to achieve these goals. Yeah.
Right. Or just to be in your bonnet. My other question for you, Shankar, is, considering the example of the Marshall Plan as an incentive for free trade, considering the example of the IMF deal in Honduras as an incentive for opening up the markets, what do you think? And we've raised a couple of thoughts about using clean asset bonds and loans or victory bonds and loans as a private-to-private incentive, but maybe there are some things that are better than that, or maybe that's complicated. I don't know. But what do you think about the idea of using an incentive of some sort to help, the UK achieve its free trade agenda? And what should that incentive be? I mean, I know you proposed a chunk of money to be given to the UK, to the EU, I'm sorry, to get them to agree. But I don't know what else you might think of in terms of an incentive for trade agreements that address ACMDs and competition. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of incentives, I'm not sure that's a really an issue of getting a financial incentive or an incentive of that kind. But I think it's one of the advantages of getting this on the agenda for agreements is that it will help deal with some of the most pressing problems in international trade, particularly distortions and particularly the US-China trade dispute. So, I think that would be an important element of this. But I think in terms of what the UK could additionally do, and I think there was a conversation earlier on about the environmental goods agreement, environmental goods and environmental services. And certainly the UK should, and I wouldn't read into the fact they haven't done it yet as an indication they don't want to do it, but just literally a result of bandwidth. I think the UK would be very willing to jump on board that agreement, and I can help with trying to effect that. But not only the UK. I mean, once you've got the UK to pay attention to those kinds of proposals, then you also use via the UK soft power networks and Commonwealth and so on to reach other larger groupings of countries. So I think certainly that would be something the UK could do.
I think that Ron Steenblick has a couple of thoughts, and we also had a question from the audience about carbon taxes and cap and trade programs. Ronald?
Yeah, hi. I guess I'm just a little bit curious. People keep talking about standards and what they have in mind and making openings conditional on standards. If I understood, I mean, I know that the industry, like say the wind turbine industry, has often complained about various requirements that they have to meet imposed by the individual electric utilities. But is that what people have in mind? I'm not sure, because otherwise standards are, well, okay, just also to clarify, in WTO speak, a standard is voluntary. What I think that people are thinking about is what the WTO calls regulation. So if it's mandatory, it's a regulation. If it's a voluntary thing, it's a standard. So I'm just trying to figure out here what people have in mind.
Well, I mean, certainly the concept that was being discussed by Jim Connaughton is that these are voluntary standards. So in the NTTAA, what the NTTAA says is that if there are consensus standards, voluntary consensus standards that meet the objective that otherwise would be met by a regulation, those standards should be given preference to as an alternative to the adoption of a mandatory top-down regulation. So there is so standards and regulations can again they're sort of seen as alternatives in a sense, right? So you do have regulatory standards. There are lots of regulatory standards out there. But this is the NTTA focuses on the idea of voluntary standards as being preferable if they're adopted widely by the industry.
But are you connecting those with trade and environmental goods and tariffs and environmental goods?
So you could do, right? So you could do that in the context of, for example, a performance standard I mean, so the one that Jim Connaughton gave an example of was actually a regulation, but it's a performance standard. It was a reduction in energy use of 70% in light bulbs. But you could create a more, these voluntary standards through the various national standard setting bodies, through ISO, etc., that could then form the basis for the criteria for having a lower tariff on the goods and services, or meeting mutual recognition criteria for regulations.
If you're talking about energy, okay, so for example, pumps, there is an international standard on that, and everybody understands that. Light bulbs is pretty much also now international standards on that. If you get into things like energy efficiency of appliances and then it gets very complicated. And I can send you a link to a paper that I wrote with a couple of other people years ago. It's a mess.
Well, I mean, it's sort of a mess anyway, because how do you deal with innovative products that for which there is no standard and there's no criteria? It's right, so it's a mess in any case.
Well, yeah, but that's what ISO is for.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's where okay, I won't take a lot of time in this, but that's where I have a problem with any kind of attempt to try to define what's clean and what's not clean, is that there's a lot of gray area.
Yeah.
So okay, if you're dealing with tariffs, I mean, eliminating tariffs on it's just generally a good thing anyway, and you're not harming stuff. But it's well, I'll stop there. But
well, we should have it seems like we should have a follow-on conversation that doesn't involve everyone on this conversation right now. I think we've now taken up 25 minutes more of everyone's time than we'd originally committed to. So I'm conscious that we should perhaps wrap things up, unless there are any sort of pressing kind of observations or concerns. So someone wanted to know our view on carbon cap and trade versus carbon taxes. I think that's a conversation for another time, although, I mean, maybe Rod wants to just repeat his observations about the merits of clean asset bonds and loans as an alternative to carbon taxes and cap and trade. But maybe it's better to leave it to another time.
Who is asking the question, Ellie?
One of the attendees asked our thoughts on Mansour Hussain, our thoughts on carbon taxes and cap and trade. And I knew it was a large discussion. And then I just put forward our general view that we're in favor of lowering taxes rather than imposing new taxes.
Well, I think that's correct. I think that one of the problems that you have with carbon taxes is the inelasticity of fossil fuel demand. And that is driven by, barriers to deployment in terms of market barriers, anti-competitive barriers, and it's also driven by technological constraints, which means that some of the technologies are not really perfected, they're not dispatchable. There are problems that mean people have trouble shifting, and that means that your carbon tax has to be actually higher than the social cost of carbon. So that makes it a little bit difficult. And the clean free market frameworks that we're talking about directly attack the technological constraints and market barriers. So you can reduce those. And eventually, if you need to use a carbon price mechanism, it'll be much cheaper once you have the barriers removed. As far as carbon markets go, I think that the voluntary carbon markets idea that Charles Hernick proposed earlier is a really interesting one, and one that could really be very interesting to deploy with more and more companies simply making these voluntary commitments. It seems like a good way to go to make that more voluntary. That's my comment on that. But
I think I'd agree with all of that. There is an enormous economics literature on carbon taxes and cap and trade. I'm sort of the opinion that it would be preferable to replace all of the existing regulations and subsidies with a small carbon tax. Small in part because of the high short-term price elasticity of demand. So the sort of broad conclusion among economists would be that you should have a low and rising carbon tax, and the fact that it's rising and you know that it's rising in the future would be an incentive to innovate and supply alternatives, which would lead to a reduction in price elasticity of demand for carbon-related or carbon-emitting technologies. But I think it is a conversation for another time, and I don't want to take everyone's precious afternoon. But I think actually mostly I think this has proved that there is enormous potential for further conversation on this matter, on these matters, not the carbon tax matter, but on around the issues that we've discussed today, Rod. So let's organise a bigger charrette that tries to drill down more concretely into some answers.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether or not this is a single charrette, or maybe there's one that focuses on things like U.S. markets and opening up U.S. markets faster, and one that's focuses on international markets. It's interesting that we tried to cross-pollinate here, but there's so many people who wanted to join as experts that it would get it to be a very crowded charrette, I think, to do them both together. So in any event, we will talk about that later. And I want to thank you, Julian, as one of the leading co-hosts with the Reason Foundation. It's been really incredible working with you guys, and bringing in. I think that we have actually brought in quite a lot of free market thinkers into this discussion who have not really thought about these issues before, which is good. And I want to thank everyone who's participated and hung in with us. So thank you very much, and we will continue the conversation in the near future.
Absolutely. Just everyone, the final thoughts. Thank you very much for attending, for all the co-hosts, and the Clean Capitalist Leadership Council.org website. We've been trying to capture all this information, and resources are being posted up in our resources section, including a brief primer on the ACTS agreement written by Ron Steenblick. We'll have edited videos and a few reading material from Lynn Kiesling and Shankar, and others have contributed. So we hope to contribute to the effort, and see you all when we schedule this charrette coming up. Have a great day.
Thank
everybody.
you all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.